Two high school seniors, eager to savor the final days of summer, set out for a field party to meet friends. Tragically, they would never arrive. This chilling story reveals how a single wrong turn can lead to devastating consequences. Today I'm taking you to a place that I've never talked about before: Ozark, Alabama. In Ozark, Alabama, life unfolds at a gentle southern pace. Sunny days melt into nights with fireflies twinkling. It's a very tight-knit community with oak-lined streets filled with the memories of generations that came before, where friendly faces greet you from porch swings, swaying in the warm breeze. You can smell the hickory smoke from the backyard barbecues mingling with the scent of honeysuckle vines that wrap around weathered fences. The mornings start with roosters crowing and boots hitting the pavement as neighbors head to their local diner, where sweet tea refills are endless and the gossip is thicker than the grits. Evenings are for Friday night football under the stadium lights, cheering for the Wildcats. In Ozark, life is simple, and the sense of belonging is warm and comforting, because you're not just a resident, you're part of the fabric of a town where everyone knows your name and welcomes you with a smile. It's supposed to be in a fictional town in rural Alabama, but Ozark isn't that rural. Parts of it are. There's a similar town close by called Dothan, about 30 minutes away, and that is where the first person that I'm going to introduce you to was born. Her name is Tracie Jean Hawlett. She was born in Dothan, Alabama on March 3, 1982. She's the only child of Carol and Robert Hawlett, who went by Bob. He's a Vietnam veteran who served in the Marines and was also well-liked as a Dothan police corporal. Sadly, tragedy struck when Tracie was just under 5 years old. In January of 1987, just 6 weeks before Tracie's birthday, Bob actually drowned on a lake while he was on a fishing trip. As you can imagine, his unexpected death would be hard on Tracie and her mother. Later, Carol eventually remarried a man named Mike Roberts, and they had 2 sons together, Benjamin and Christopher. Mike treated Tracie like his own daughter, and the family was very active in their church. In fact, Tracie's life centered around Heritage Baptist Church, where she actively participated in their youth group and was involved in their Sunday school program. She even went on to teach at Vacation Bible School. Tracie was well known for her loving and giving nature. She got along well with her parents, and especially bonded with her mom. Even as a teenager, she didn't argue with her parents, and she willingly spent time with her younger brothers. She would take them on car rides with the convertible top down and the music blaring. Tracie excelled academically, consistently making the honor roll throughout elementary, middle, and high school. She attended Northview High School, where she was a majorette and part of the yearbook staff. Outside of school, Tracie had a passion for pursuing a career as a missionary doctor after experiencing a life-altering mission trip to Texas while she was participating at church. During this experience, Tracie realized her true calling was to make a difference in the lives of others. She experienced firsthand the limited access to health care, and she wanted to help underserved communities. In the meantime, Tracie worked at a J.C. Penney store in the men's department, and she took on babysitting jobs for families in her neighborhood. Growing up, Tracie was very close to her 2 younger brothers, as I mentioned, and she would be seen walking them to various activities. Tracie was also very close with her mother. The bond they shared was special, going beyond the normal parent-child relationship. She referred to her mom as her best friend. Tracie and Carol's bond was unique. They supported and cheered one another on. They laughed together and were there through thick and thin. The mother and daughter loved spending time together, whether they were shopping, having a lunch date, or just sharing a cup of coffee. Everywhere Tracie went, she stood out for her outgoing and bubbly personality. She always seemed to be smiling, and her great sense of humor made her very popular. She had a wide circle of friends, which included her best friend, J.B. Beasley, who was in the same grade as she was. Tracie and J.B.'s classmates noticed that the girls shared a lot of similarities. They were in the same church youth group and were both known for being friendly, hardworking, and outgoing. They even participated in the Miss Spectrum beauty pageant together, both earning spots in the top 10. They were beautiful on the inside and out. J.B. Hilton Green Beasley was born in Troy, Alabama on July 31, 1982, to her mom Cheryl and father Hilton Lanyard Beasley. J.B.'s unique name wasn't short for Jessica or Janet. It was nothing like that. She got her name from a combination of her dad's name, Hilton, and her dad's childhood friend's name, which is James Buford Green. J.B. didn't use the name James, she just always went by the initials J.B. She did have an older sister, Liv, who was actually 7 years her senior. Unfortunately, her father, Hilton, and her mother, Cheryl, eventually split up. Cheryl married a man named Joseph Bernard Burgoon, who by the way has the same initials as J.B., actually J.B.B. This was important, at least for Cheryl and Joe, because all of their daughters had the initials J.B.B. going forward. They went on to have 4 daughters together. In 1988, Jamie Brooke. In 1989, Jackie Bernice. In 1991, Jo Beth B.R.D. And in 1994, Jillian B. I tried to find her middle name, but I couldn't. However, it did start with an A, and I thought that was so cool, how even if these women go on to marry and change their last names, they will all still be JB because their first and middle names all begin with JB. All the girls were close in age to JB and grew up in Dothan. Like Tracy, JB had experienced a tragic loss in her family at a young age. In May of 1994, JB's older sister Liv passed away at only 19 years old. I tried, but I could not find out how Liv passed away. She was a graduate of Jeff Davis High School and then attended Auburn University, working at an eye doctor's office in McGary, Alabama, when she died. Liv's death made JB the oldest sister, and she took that role very seriously. She acted as a guardian to her sisters, always looking out for them. JB's cousin, Lindsay Turner, whose mother and JB's father, Lanyard, are brother and sister and was 4 years older than JB, recalls her being kind and patient, especially with her younger sisters, who could get on her nerves sometimes. Lindsay said JB loved her sisters more than anything in the world, and she did so much for them. She babysat them quite frequently and would even prepare their lunches in the morning for school. Lindsay said JB was literally the best person that she had ever known. But she was also the typical teenager growing up in the 1990s. She was passionate about things like country music and idolized artists such as Garth Brooks, Tim McGraw, Alan Jackson, and the Dixie Chicks. Her favorite song that held a special place in her heart, though, was Angel by Sarah McLachlan. You may be able to relate to the next thing that JB was obsessed with. It was definitely a blast from the past. She loved Bath & Body Works. But her favorite scent of all time was none other than cucumber melon. She would always be wearing it, and Lindsay remembers that it was a go-to gift everyone would gift to JB for whatever the occasion. JB, her sisters, and her mom were also models. They modeled for department stores like Gaffer's, Parisians, and McRae's. One particular memory they shared together was being on the runway at a Mother's Day fashion show. The sisters shared many memorable times. They loved watching the Jaws movie over and over again and singing Navy songs from the films. They loved dancing, dressing up, and giving full-blown performances. JB had an undying passion for dance. She excelled in ballet, jazz, lyrical, and tap, earning various dance trophies and awards, including All-American Cheerleader. JB's sister, Jo Beth, said that JB was made to dance. She was an angel gliding on the stage, and you could feel her passion for it when she danced. Jo Beth remembers being in awe of JB's dancing. She would watch her sister, dreaming of being like her when she got older. JB was so serious about dance that after high school, she planned to pursue it as a career. She wanted to go to Texas Christian University, where she dreamed of majoring in dance. Yet dance wasn't her only talent. She maintained a spot on the honor roll and even received a United States National Honor Roll award. She was a member of the Future Business Leaders of America. Just like Tracy, JB took her studies very seriously. She was always busy. But when she wasn't in school dancing, she was shopping, tanning, and spending time with friends and family. JB also held a job as a file clerk and a receptionist at Southern Clinic, where she was known for actually making friends with all of the patients. While JB enjoyed her job, her passion would always be dance. At some point in July 1999, she actually landed a job as a dance instructor. But sadly, she never got the chance to begin this dream role of hers. I want to take you back to Saturday, July 31st, 1999. It was JB's 17th birthday, and both she and Tracie were gearing up for their senior year of high school, which was set to start in just a few days on August 3rd. At this time, Cheryl and JB's stepdad Joe had gotten divorced, and they shared custody of the children. They would go back and forth between the two households, and on that particular weekend, the girls were over at Joe's house. They would be back over at Cheryl's on Sunday evening to celebrate JB's birthday and mark the end of summer. She and Tracie decided to attend a field party that night. The plan was for JB to spend the night at Tracie's, and then the next morning, they would go to church together before JB had to make it back home in time for her sister Jackie's 10th birthday party. JB wouldn't miss her sister's party for anything. She knew how much it meant for her to be there for Jackie. At around 10 p.m., the two 17-year-old friends left Tracie's house in JB's black 1994 Mazda 929, a gift from her father. They headed out to the field party in Headland, which was about 20 miles northeast of Dothan. I'm not sure if being teenagers meant not being able to keep track of time or consider how long it would take to get to their destination, then hang out and go all the way back to Tracie's. But she had a long-standing and strict 11:30 p.m. curfew. Back then, of course, there was no GPS, so the girls couldn't simply plug in the location and know exactly how much time it would take to go there and back. I just kept thinking, looking at the map on Google, that they weren't really going to have that much time to hang out. It would have taken them about 17, maybe 20 minutes, give or take, to get there, so technically, they would only have about an hour to hang out until they had to make it back in time for Tracie's curfew. I don't think they were planning to make it. I think they were going to ask for forgiveness instead of permission. However, they never made it to that party. They got lost on the way through the curving, winding roads. They didn't have cell phones, so they had to find a payphone to call for help. That would have to be nerve-wracking for a parent, not only not knowing where your kids were, but how would anyone know where the girls were if they even found a payphone to call? Just after 11:30 p.m., JB and Tracie saw a gas station with an attached convenience store called the Big Little. It was located at 763 East Broad Street in Ozark, Alabama, that small town I told you about, with about 15,000 people. It's roughly 23 miles northwest of their home in Dothan. I don't know how they got this far off track, but if you look on the map, Ozark is pretty much in the totally opposite direction from Headland where they were supposed to be going. When they got to the store, they planned to ask someone for directions and just use the payphone to let Tracie's mom, Carol, know they were running late for Tracie's 11:30 curfew. When the girls arrived at the Big Little store, they found out it was closed, but there was a payphone. Tracie used it to call her mother. She told Carol that they never made it to the party because they got lost. However, there was a car pulling up at that moment. It was a mother and daughter, and they were talking to them and trying to get directions back to Dothan from where they were. Once they knew how to get back to Tracie's, she relayed this to her mother and then asked if, on the way back, she and JB could quickly stop by her boyfriend Wade's house to see him and some friends in Midland City on their way home, which would have been the halfway mark between Ozark and Dothan. Carol said okay, but you can only stay for 5 minutes since that 11:30 curfew had already passed. Tracie agreed, and she said, "I love you," and hung up with her mom. When Tracie hung up, she called Wade, and they agreed to meet up at the Midland City gas station. Carol was expecting the girls to arrive back sometime after midnight, but when over an hour had passed, she started to get worried. She decided to make some phone calls to find out if she could figure out where the girls were. Now, Carol wasn't that familiar with JB's mother or stepfather, and I realize not all parents get too acquainted with one another. Maybe they know their name, their address, their phone number, the basic information. Both had daughters that they trusted, and that weekend, JB's mother didn't have the kids. She was working at a tennis shop at a country club that whole weekend. That night, she was actually not just working, but in a tennis tournament. She finished up around 10 p.m., the same time the girls would have been heading out of town and unknowingly into Ozark. After work, Cheryl stopped by a friend's house to feed his dog since he was out of town, and then around 10:30, Cheryl decided to stop at a local block party held at a popular restaurant and pub in downtown Dothan called Poplar Head. She met up with a friend, Maman, and she thought she might actually run into JB and Tracie that night. She was hoping she would so that she could say happy birthday to her daughter in person. So, all throughout the night, Cheryl kept searching the crowd, but of course, she never saw her. Since they didn't have cell phones, even if Tracie's mom had called Cheryl's house, she wouldn't have been home to receive that call. The last time she and JB talked was actually Thursday night, 2 nights before her birthday. JB was telling her about 2 different dates that she had scheduled for Friday night. Before JB left her mother's, her mom had a special birthday wish for her. She said it could be summed up with the song Forever Young by Bob Dylan. Cheryl shared with JB the lyrics of that song that deeply resonated with her, and she wanted JB to understand the importance of staying forever young at heart. She believed that JB possessed a unique youthful spirit that should never be lost. To further express her wish, Cheryl presented JB with a copy of that song. She encouraged her to listen to the lyrics and consider the message. Not only that, Cheryl mentioned how JB's dancing skills would be perfect to complement the song, and she said, "You should choreograph a routine to it." No one had any idea what Tracie and JB were going to go through the night of JB's birthday. Finally, Carol did get a hold of Wade, and what he told her made her even more concerned. He said the girls never showed up at the Midland City gas station. He and his friends waited for at least 30 minutes, but when they didn't come by, Wade and his friends left. Later that night, he tried calling Tracie at home several times to make sure she made it, but she never answered. Hours were passing with no word from the girls. Carol even began calling hospitals in the area to check if the girls were there, but they weren't. She was worried and unable to find them, so Tracie's stepdad Mike went out and looked for them. He searched parking lots, roads, all around town and beyond, but he didn't find them or JB's car. When Mike returned without any news, Carol called the Dothan Police Department to report the girls missing. It was now 8 a.m. Sunday morning, August 1st. Carol gave the police all the information about the girls, when they left, the kind of car they were driving, and that she spoke to Tracie around 11:30 p.m. the night before when the girls were at the gas station in Ozark. Meanwhile, Cheryl, JB's mom, had no idea that anything was wrong. At around 9:15 in the morning, she received a phone call from JB's dance teacher, and the teacher asked her who was responsible for JB that weekend. Cheryl thought that was kind of an odd question, and when she asked her why, the teacher just responded with, "Oh, it's nothing." This statement left Cheryl unsettled. She decided to go on with her day and head to the country club, but, because of this strange phone call, she was preoccupied with thoughts that something may be wrong with her daughter. She couldn't help feeling that something was off. As she carried on her duties at the country club, a family friend came in and approached her and informed her that JB and Tracie had not returned to Tracie's house the night before. Of course, this was even more unsettling, but maybe the girls were just having a little too much fun, and they decided to stay with friends. I know that most of us don't want to think the worst right away. Cheryl spent the next several hours trying to find out where her daughter was, having conversations with her friends, and then finally the police. She was desperate for information regarding her now missing teenager. However, no one seemed to have any knowledge of their whereabouts. But hours earlier, at 9 a.m., a patrol officer out in Ozark, who had no idea about Tracie and JB, was doing his normal rounds. That's when he noticed a black Mazda that appeared to be abandoned on the side of Herring Avenue, a narrow road that's often used by locals as a shortcut through town. This area was located less than a mile from the Big Little store. Looking at photos, I can see that Herring Avenue is surrounded by dense woods on both sides, and it looks like it would be very dark at night. So, why would the girls have stopped there? Did they run out of gas? And where were they now? The thing is, at the time when they found the Mazda, the patrol officer didn't know that this car belonged to JB or that it was connected to missing teens. So all the officer did was report the car as abandoned. Not much else could be done. About 10:30 in the morning, they were making the connection between the girls and the gas station in Ozark. Eventually, the Ozark PD became aware that the girls had made contact with Carol at that payphone off East Broad Street at the gas station. That's when they reviewed their system and saw the report of the abandoned vehicle that matched the description of the Mazda that JB was driving. Here's the exact location where the car had been found, and this is how far it is from the big little gas station and convenience store where they stopped to call Tracy's mom, a mere 2-minute drive. Officers went out to that location to see if maybe there were any clues as to what had happened. The car was locked. One of the windows on the driver's side was cracked just a little bit, and it appeared that the car may have been out of gas. It was very muddy, and it didn't look like the car had been forced off the road. There was no damage to the outside. When they looked inside, they saw that a purse was on the floor in front of the passenger seat. Since they couldn't get inside, they decided to break one of the windows with a baton to gain entry. Once in the car, they found JB's driver's license stuck in between the seat and the center console, and the purse had credit cards, jewelry, and cash still inside. It didn't look like they had been robbed or that anyone forced themselves into the car. The police had been given a description of JB's key ring. I don't know if you remember these from the 90s, but they were little white blocks with black letters. One of them had a heart on it and spelled out, "Hard to get." Despite doing a thorough search of the vehicle, including underneath the seats, the officers could not locate these keys. Without the keys, they couldn't get into the locked trunk of the Mazda to continue looking for clues. They even used a metal detector in the area, but they couldn't find the keys. At this point, officers from Ozark informed the Dothan Police Department that JB's car had been located, and a detective came out to the scene. Everyone was concerned about this abandoned vehicle. Besides it being linked to their disappearance, the car had some red flags. It was very dirty, like it had been taken off-road. There was mud on the rear bumper, the wheel wells, and dry sand and mud inside as well. This was concerning because there were no dirt roads nearby, just a footpath that went into the nearby woods. They also found smudge marks on one of the back doors that looked like they could be a handprint. They really wanted to find a way to open JB's trunk. They were looking for a button inside that would release the hatch. If they couldn't figure it out, they were going to call a locksmith. While all this was going on in Ozark, JB's little sister, Jackie, was back in Dothan with her dad, waiting to meet up with all of her friends for her birthday at a pool for a swimming party. Their 3 cousins had actually flown in from Japan to spend time with them before school started after the summer. They were all excited to get to the party, but Jackie noticed that her dad had been in and out of the house all morning, and he seemed to be preoccupied. She was scared that they were going to be late to her own party, but they did eventually get there, and they began having a lot of fun. However, after a while, she realized that JB had never shown up, and her dad was missing in action too. That was pretty upsetting. She also felt that something wasn't right when she finally got back home to her dad's later that afternoon. Her sisters and her cousins thought something was wrong. Their grandmother was in her room with the door closed, and they could hear her talking to someone. It sounded like a very intense conversation. Now little 7-year-old Jo Beth could even feel the tension, but no one was saying anything. However, she felt like the adults were acting kind of weird, making sure that the girls were staying busy. They had no idea that their older sister was missing. Now back in Ozark, the detectives were planning to have a tow truck come and get the vehicle and bring it back to Dothan. As officers were waiting, the detectives finally realized that they could use a button inside the car to pop the trunk. At this point it was around 2 p.m., and when they popped that trunk and the officers looked inside, they made a devastating discovery. There were both JB and Tracy's lifeless bodies lying right next to each other. This had now turned from a missing persons case to a homicide investigation because it was clear that both of the girls had been murdered. They were fully clothed with mud all over their clothing. Rigor mortis had already reached its peak and was starting to diminish. Therefore, the bodies were transitioning to the next phase when bodies go from being stiff to soft again. It was difficult for them to figure out approximately when they died. It was super hot that day. Records show it was around 100 degrees, and overnight it hadn't even dipped below 81 degrees. What happened to JB and Tracie? The police wouldn't know for sure until the bodies were removed from the trunk and taken to the medical examiner's office for autopsies. While that was being conducted, both families were being notified of this heartbreaking news. When Cheryl found out, she said that she immediately started to vomit. She could not believe that her little girl was killed on her birthday. She just kept imagining JB calling out to her in her last moments, wanting her mom by her side, and she couldn't be there to help her. The shock and despair of this entire situation overwhelmed her. Her whole world was turned upside down in a minute. In the next few hours, many of her family and friends would come to be by her side at her home to comfort her. It was around 6 p.m. when Jackie remembers hearing her grandmother scream inside of her room, and she could hear her crying. Yet still no one had said anything to the kids. I want to read you exactly what Jackie said. She remembers about that night when her dad finally drove the girls to their mother's house. She said, "As we got close to the house, I immediately noticed the slow funeral sign sitting in the yard. My dad kept reassuring us that everything was okay, but I knew better. I asked him if my mom was dead, and he said, 'No, she's okay.' My dad walked us all into the house, and I saw my mother sitting on the floor crying with people all around her. She grabbed us all and put her arms around us. While looking at us all in the face, she said, 'JB is dead.' I couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Those words hit me so hard I couldn't even speak. All I remember is being silent and walking the house, waiting for her to come home any minute. The next morning, I woke up and heard the shower going, and I got up thinking it was JB. Then it hit me that she was never coming back. My world had been turned upside down, and our family was never going to be the same." She said that her last memory of JB was on Saturday morning, the day before Jackie's birthday. JB gave her a big hug and told Jackie that she would see her the next day at her party. Jackie remembers JB hugging her for a few seconds and telling her that she loved her. She said that was the last time she heard her sweet voice, and she will never forget it. JB's family had not experienced one, but now 2 of Cheryl's daughters had died just years apart. Just like that, Jamie Brooke became the oldest sister, just like JB had when Liv passed away, and now they became 4 sisters. There would be one less sister running through the house and fighting over the bathroom in the morning as they were getting ready for school. Little Job Beth was only 7, and she remembers that day that she got the news. Her older sister was gone. She said, "I remember walking into my mom's house and I saw everyone surrounding our mother and crying. That's when we got the most devastating news. Because I was so young, I didn't quite understand what was going on. I couldn't believe that I wouldn't be able to see my sister again. It was so hard to understand at that time. It would be hard for any of us to understand, but especially a young child." Then there was JB's cousin, Lindsay, who had been busy at school at Auburn University when the news came in. She was so upset that she couldn't be with her family. She said, "I wanted to stay at my parents' house until we got more news. But I had papers due early that week, so my parents insisted that I head back to Auburn and they would keep me updated. That afternoon was torture, waiting to hear anything, but I somehow managed to slap together rough drafts of my papers. When I was finished, I jumped in the shower and intended to call my parents as soon as I got out. I had just gotten dressed and was about to dry my hair when I heard a knock at the door. When I looked out the peephole, I saw my brother and sister-in-law, and I knew right then what they were about to tell me. Opening the door, the look on my brother's face was all I needed. It was like someone had kicked me in the stomach, and the pain would never stop. I had experienced numerous terrible days in my life, including a head-on collision with an 18-wheeler, but the day we lost JB is still by far the worst day of my life. Tracie's mother, Carol, and stepfather Mike received the devastating news that JB and Tracie had been found, but tragically they were no longer alive. It is the worst news that any parent can get, and Cheryl thought it was odd that Carol and her husband had never reached out to grieve with JB's family. They had never become close after both their daughters had died together, And I was thinking that maybe Carol held some resentment towards Cheryl because it was JB's birthday, and Tracie was more of a follower than a leader. She was kind of going along with JB's plans that night in JB's car. Who knows? But the two families never connected with one another through their grief. Some people do want to be alone in these moments. Going back to the officers over in Ozark, when they were getting ready to transport the victims' bodies, they noticed a 9mm shell casing lying on the bend of one of Tracie's knees. As they carefully looked inside, they concluded that Tracie had been stuffed inside the trunk first. She had a single gunshot wound to her temple. They could see a cut on her arm, and under closer inspection, there were briar thorns stuck to her pant legs. She was still wearing a brand new pair of New Balance shoes, news that her parents said she just purchased the week before for about $95. But now they were covered in a thick layer of mud. It looked as though JB had a gunshot wound to her cheek. She also had mud on her shoes, and both girls' pants were wet from the knees down. Once the girls' bodies were removed from the trunk, the police carefully looked inside and concluded that the girls were killed after they were forced inside that trunk, but not at that location. They came to this conclusion based on a few reasons. There was some sort of indentation in the trunk where Tracie's head had been, and a 9mm shell casing was lying where JB's head was positioned. As for why they didn't think the car was in that location when the shots were fired, it was because while looking over the car, the police kept hearing a dripping sound coming from below. When they checked underneath, they found blood that was dripping and blowback, and this signified that a bullet had gone through the trunk and the car had been moving when blood was dripping. There was also dried blood on the ground and somewhat of a trail, and then a large puddle, which signified to detectives that the car had been sitting there for a while. All this evidence led the police to believe the girls were attacked, then forced into the trunk and shot somewhere else, and then the car was moved to Herring Avenue hours earlier and abandoned. The police continued checking out the car, and inside they found more mud and sand, but they noticed it was only on the driver's side floor. This made them theorize the killer was the one that drove the car to Herring Avenue and left it there, taking JB's keys with them. The police also noticed that the rearview mirror was actually on the floor of the passenger side of the car. This meant that there was probably a struggle inside of that vehicle. It would take quite a lot of force to take a rearview mirror off like that. They checked for fingerprints, but the only ones they found were from the two officers that had searched the car before knowing that the girls were murdered. The Ozark police realized that they could not investigate these murders by themselves, so the Alabama Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and other law enforcement agencies were brought in to assist them. Meanwhile, Dr. Gregory Wagner performed autopsies on the girls, and he concluded that JB was shot in the face close up and that she died immediately from a brainstem injury. There was gunpowder stippling on JB's hand, which indicated that the gun had been close to her when fired, but Dr. Wagner couldn't determine the exact distance. He noted that JB's shoes and the inside of her jeans were muddy, which suggested that her pants had been off at one point. That's how the dirt got inside. This was important because it could go towards a possible sexual motive if her clothes had been removed. Dr. Wagner concluded that Tracie died from a gunshot wound to the temple. He also found gunpowder stippling on the back of her right hand and determined the gun was about 2 feet away when fired. He could tell that Tracie's hand was close to her head. It wasn't outstretched when the gun went off. Her shoes and her jeans were muddy, and there was a bit of blood on her shoes. JB and Tracie didn't have drugs or alcohol in their systems, but they did have a lot of scratches and abrasions on their arms. There were no outward signs of forced sexual intercourse initially, and the reason being they usually look for tear marks or other signs of injuries to the genital region, and that was not observed. However, this was later questioned because they did vaginal swabs. JB had semen in her swabs, while Tracie did not. When they did further testing, swabbing the girls' bodies and testing their clothing, JB's bra, underwear, and sweater all had traces of semen on them, and her sweater had blood on it as well. A DNA profile was created with this evidence and sent to CODIS, and they were waiting to see if they could find a match. With the autopsies complete, the police focused on figuring out JB and Tracie's last moves. They knew the last time anyone heard from the girls was at 11:30 p.m. Bellevue, when they talked to Carol from the Big Little store in Ozark. The girls mentioned that two women had given them directions home. Police wanted to speak to these two women, and they soon learned they were Marilyn Merritt and her daughter, Marielle. They'd come forward after word got out about the murders. Marielle told police that around 11:30 p.m. on the 31st, she and her mom had gone to the Big Little store for a soda. When they pulled up, they saw one car in the parking lot, a black Mazda. Marielle walked up to the store but found the doors locked. The store had closed for the evening around 11 p.m. As she was turning to leave, JB approached her. Marielle said that her friend was using the payphone to the far right of the parking lot, and JB said they were lost. Marielle gave initial directions to US Highway 231, and then her mom, Marilyn, added a few landmarks that they should look out for. Marielle and Marilyn made sure the girls connected with someone on the phone before they left. When the police asked Marilyn and Marielle if the Mazda that the girls were driving was dirty, they said no. The car was spotless, and the girls were perfectly clean. Nothing seemed wrong except for them getting lost. Then, as the mother and daughter got back into their car and were heading out of the parking lot, they looked and saw the girls behind them getting into their vehicle. Then, they saw them pull to the end of the parking lot and make a right in the direction of the highway, just like they were told to do. Other information gathered from JB's family is that she had just filled up her gas tank on Saturday before the girls left for this trip, but it was found near empty when the car was located. After speaking to Marilyn and Marielle, detectives noted that Herring Avenue, where the Mazda was found, which was so close by, wasn't on the way back to Dothan, so how did the car end up there and on empty? It didn't make a lot of sense. Luckily, the Big Little store did have security cameras, so the police got surveillance video from inside the store and outside the store to verify the girls were there. Unfortunately, the surveillance system wasn't your typical system that records one area continuously. The system would record 12 seconds inside the store, and then switch to 12 seconds in the parking lot, and then go back and forth for hours on end. The police sent the tape off to be sliced together, so it would only include the area outside, and also so they could have it enhanced. When the police got the footage back, they saw something. It wasn't the best quality, even when enhanced. They saw that JB and Tracie were there at the time that Marielle and Marilyn recalled seeing them. But police noticed something else. A poor quality image of what appeared to be a white, foreign-made mid-size pickup truck that had arrived after Marielle and Marilyn had just pulled in, and Tracie and JB were on that payphone. The truck stayed at one of the gas pumps for about 3 minutes, and then left shortly before JB's car left. Since the store was closed, no one could have entered to pay with cash, and there was no record of a gas purchase at the pump during that period with either a credit card or debit card. The video obtained from the surveillance camera did not capture any clear images of the driver leaving. The identity of the individual behind the wheel was unknown. Despite the efforts from police, they weren't able to gather any information regarding this white truck. They pleaded with the public to assist them in their investigation, but unfortunately, no one came forward with any information. I was looking at this picture that they released, and honestly to me it looks like a blob. I can't even tell what I'm looking at, so it's no wonder no one was able to identify anyone or anything in this picture. In addition to putting together a timeline for the girls, the police searched for the place where the girls had been shot. One spot they looked at was near Highway 123, just west of the Big Little store. Someone living in that area said that they heard gunshots around 2:15 in the morning, and they reported it to the police. When the investigators did go out there, they found shell casings on the road, but they eventually determined this was not the scene of the murder. This was because the shell casings were not a match. They kept searching diligently for weeks, trying to find out where JB and Tracie were killed, but they just could not determine the spot. By August 8th, a little after a week from when the bodies had been found, a hotline was set up to take in tips. There was a $25,000 reward offered. Flyers with pictures of Tracie and JB in the Mazda were plastered everywhere. The police had talked to over 150 people and followed many leads, but the progress was slow. The police worked non-stop to solve this case, and by August 18th, the reward was over $35,000, and 3 FBI profilers had actually joined the investigation. They hoped that this would help them find a suspect, but it didn't. It was on September 1st that the police released that surveillance footage I was telling you about of the truck that I couldn't even make out. No one ever came forward with any tips. But there was about to be a big break in this case. A tip came in from a man named John William Barentine. At 11:30 p.m. the night of July 31st, 1999, the same night that JB and Tracie got lost in Ozark and were at the Big Little store on the phone with Tracie's mom, John, a 28-year-old part-time mechanic, told his wife he was going to go to the store to get some milk for their 2-year-old son. The thing is, according to his wife, he didn't come home until close to 1 o'clock in the morning. When he came through the door, he appeared to be very upset. She asked him what happened, and he said, quote, "I was hit by a black truck with a Dothan tag near Herring Avenue," end quote. Well, we know that JB was from Dothan, and her vehicle was found on Herring Avenue. It was black, but it wasn't a truck, and there was no damage that would have connected it to any kind of accident. In the next few days, John began talking to his friends and family members, saying that he thought he might know something about the 2 dead girls. That was how he referred to them. John told one of his friends, Leon Jordan, that he thought he might know who did it, and Leon told him, if you know something, you should report it, especially because there's a reward for any information leading to an arrest. So on September 1st, Leon was aware that John was at the police station being questioned. Well, the next day, on September 2nd, the Ozark police shared some big news that everyone had been waiting for. They had made an arrest. It may come as a surprise, but it was none other than the man they questioned the day before, John Barentine. At first, the police didn't tell the public how he was connected. During a press conference about the arrest, the Ozark Police Chief, Tony Spivey, said he couldn't give out much information. However, he was confident that they had the right person. He explained that the investigation wasn't over, and they were still trying to figure out a motive. The only detail that Chief Spivey could share was that John didn't know the girls, and that the murder seemed to be a crime of opportunity. While John's mother and his 3 sisters were visibly upset at this press conference, afterward they criticized the police for not sharing the evidence that allegedly linked him to the murders. They claimed he wasn't involved. They described John as a little bit strange, a bit of a loner, but they insisted he was not a killer. Jennifer, one of John's sisters, said the police were setting him up for someone else's crime. Angela, another sister of John's, mentioned that on the night of the murders, John did leave home, but not for hours like his wife said. It was only for 15 minutes to buy milk at the convenience store off of US Highway 231. Angela questioned, "How could my brother commit a double murder in such a short amount of time?" She emphasized that John was soft-hearted. He was a man that couldn't even bear to see a woman cry. Plus, he did not own a gun. Following the news of John's arrest, the media interviewed people that knew him, and almost every single one said they were surprised to hear that he was being blamed for the murders of JB and Tracie. One neighbor said that John acted a little strange, but she never saw a violent side of him. He was always really friendly to her. She never would have thought he'd be capable of murder. Many people have been fooled before, so I'm never sure about that. A regular customer at the service station where John worked said that he was always really sweet to her. She'd never even seen him upset, and she was never scared of him. She didn't think he had it in his nature to kill. Even John's boss said he didn't think he was responsible, and everyone in town was saying the same thing. He added that he wanted to know what police had against John and why they weren't talking about it. Days later, on September 9th, there was still no news about John's alleged connection to the murders. Chief Spivey said he understood the people had questions, but it wasn't the right time to give more details since, as they always say, this was an ongoing investigation. That's reasonable, but he assured everyone that he was confident the police had arrested the right guy. On September 20th, there was a preliminary hearing to figure out if the state had enough evidence to move forward with the charges against John Berrentine. This was the first time anyone outside the police department had heard the evidence against him. During that hearing, the police finally shared that a few days after JB and Tracie were killed, they got a tip that actually led them to John. This tip came from a clerk working at a video store who told police that he recorded a talk he had with a man named John. John wanted to check his surveillance tapes. That's right, from the Big Little store. John claimed that a fight had broken out on July 31st, and he needed the tape to figure out the exact time because John was inquiring about a video, the exact night and place where the girls were last seen, where a murder took place nearby. It was really odd to the clerk, and that's why he recorded this conversation. The clerk told the police he did not know John's last name, but he knew he had an account under Mary or Barry Berrentine, and the address was 109 Young Avenue in Ozark. When police went to that location, it didn't exist. However, they were able to locate a Mary Berrentine at 110 Young Avenue, and she was married to a man named John. So they spoke to her. When they asked Mary where her husband was on July 31st, that is when she told them he left around 11 p.m. to buy some milk for their son. At first, Mary did say he was only gone for 15 minutes, but then she changed her story, saying it could have been longer. She wasn't positive because he had taken her watch with him, and I was in there thinking she didn't have a clock inside her whole home. Fair enough, I guess. But then Mary said when John got back, she thought it had been at least an hour, maybe even 2, and she asked him why it took so long. That's when he told her that a black truck forced him off the road off of James and Herring Avenue, which is actually right where JB's Mazda was found. Not just on the street, but almost the exact location. The police then talked to John at his workplace about this black truck, and John said that when he went out to get the milk, he took the long way to Grocery Outlet, going down James Street. He claimed that the black truck with tinted windows and a 38 car tag came off of Herring and hit his car, then drove onto Matthew Street. John told the police that he arrived at the Grocery Outlet to buy milk at 11:35 p.m., and on his way home, he kept checking to see if the black truck was following him. Once John was back home, he just couldn't sleep, so he took a shower and then watched Rocky III until 3 a.m. The next day, he told police he used a rag to buff out the damage that the black truck had done to his car. Then he told his friends and family members that he thought there might be a connection between the black truck that hit him and the murders because of the close proximity. Before he could come forward with any information, the police had already tracked the man down. They wanted to see that rag that he used to buff off his car. They were hoping that it had traces of black paint on it, so they asked him to bring it down to the station with him. When John showed up, as requested, you think he brought the rag? He didn't, but he did show the police where he said he got hit. One officer, an experienced accident investigator, believed there was no damage to John's car and that it had never been hit by a black truck or any vehicle. The police then confronted John and said the Grocery Outlet closed at 9 p.m., so what's your story? That meant John couldn't have been there to purchase milk that night. They caught him in a lie, and that's when John admitted, "You're right, I lied. I just wanted to collect the reward money." The police asked John to tell them what really happened on the night of July 31st, and that is when this story goes off the rails. This man was questioned for 4 hours in a videotaped interview, and his story changed, I think, at least 6 times. First, he told them he was home all night, but Mary, who was in the police station as well being questioned, contradicted that. She insisted, no, he definitely left for milk. John then changed his story again, saying he actually went to the BP gas station on US 231 to buy milk, and he was there for 20 minutes, and then he drove home. He claimed that on his way home he passed the Big Little store, where he saw JB and Tracie on the payphone outside. But then, John told the police another story. In this version, he claimed a man with tattoos, who worked for his uncle and lived in a white house nearby, was the one that killed Tracie and JB. According to John, when he left for the store, he picked this man up at a four-way stop sign. As they passed the Big Little, the man saw JB and Tracie, and he suggested to John that they get some. I think you know what he'd be referring to. Well, of course, this piqued the detectives' interest since they were already aware there may be a sexual motive. John said he pulled into the parking lot, and the tattooed man went up to talk to the girls. Then he climbed into the back seat of the Mazda on the driver's side while one of the girls was still on the phone. Eventually, the girls drove off with that man in their car, and John followed them, thinking that maybe the man was going to need a ride. The Mazda stopped on Herring Avenue, so John parked on James Street, turned his lights off and his engine. Somehow he could hear the conversation that the man was having with the girls. According to John, this tattooed man and the girl who drove the Mazda got out of the car, and that's when he said the girl asked, "I thought you were going to give us directions. What are we doing in the woods?" The tattooed man replied, I will, but first you've got to give me some." John said he saw the girl who had been sitting in the passenger side get out and start to run, but the tattooed man grabbed her and dragged her back to the car. John told the police the smart one jumped on his back while he was dragging the other girl. Then, John said he watched the man put both of the girls into the trunk, and he heard 2 gunshots. Then, the tattooed man frantically ran to John's car and told him to let him get inside. He jumped in with the Mazda's keys in one hand and a gun in the other. John said they drove around for a while until he let the man out somewhere in Ozark. That is quite a story, and a lot of the things he said actually added up. How did he know all that? Well, the newspapers were talking about a lot of the facts. John was arrested after telling all of these different stories to the police. Even though he said there was another guy there, John put himself at the location where the girls were last seen, and he seemed to know way too much information not to be involved. So, they arrested him and charged him with 2 counts of capital murder. At John's preliminary hearing, the police testified that they investigated John's claims about this tattooed man killing JB and Tracie, but they eventually ruled him out as a suspect when 3 people confirmed that the man was with them on the night of the murders. At that point, the police were convinced that John and a second unknown suspect were actually the ones involved in the murders. So the investigation continued. After this, there was also evidence that after John was arrested, his cellmate came forward. There's nothing like a jailhouse snitch, and he claimed that John confessed to the murders. This only helped solidify their case against John. At the preliminary hearing, John's defense said there were way too many unanswered questions to take these charges any further. There was no motive, evidence. John didn't own a gun, he never found the gun, and there was no physical evidence tying John to the murders. Because at this point, the DNA had been analyzed, and when it was put into CODIS, there was no match. But they had yet to test it against John's DNA. Remember, the detectives believed that John and what they called another unknown suspect were involved in the murders. Well, perhaps John wasn't the one who engaged in sexual relations. The defense mentioned that John had since recanted all of his stories. He said he went to the police for the money, that's it. But the prosecution, of course, countered this statement, claiming that John didn't go to the police for the reward money. The police approached him after hearing from that video store clerk. At the end of the hearing, Judge Buddy Matthews found that there was enough evidence to at least keep John behind bars until the case could be referred to the grand jury in January of 2000. By the middle of October, John had a court hearing to decide if he was going to stay in jail without bail. And during this hearing, his defense attorney did something unusual. They had John get on the stand so that he could tell the judge that he had nothing to do with JB and Tracie's murders. John said he lied about everything. He lied about seeing the girls get killed. He lied about all those stories, and he just wanted money to pay off his bills. He claimed that he was tired and confused during that long interview with police, and he just said what they wanted to hear so he could go home. At the end of the hearing, the judge decided that John should stay in jail without bail. He ordered John to provide a DNA sample for testing against the semen found on JB. John's friends and family stood by him. His mother, Faith, said he didn't do it. He's not capable of doing it. He has a 2-year-old son, and he's not capable of doing anything to hurt a child. In early November, John's attorney announced the DNA did not match, but the police said this didn't change their investigation. They still firmly believed that John and another person were involved. But after this news came out, Judge McLean lowered John's bail to $200,000, and in mid-December, he somehow posted that bail. On January 10, 2000, the grand jury decided not to charge John with murder. At first, the police made it seem like they were going to continue this investigation into John, but soon they said that he was no longer considered a suspect, and they were back at the beginning. The big question was, what were they going to do next? It seemed like they wasted a lot of time going after a man who really didn't seem connected. A few days later, they increased the reward to $45,000, and then a new team of investigators joined the Ozark Police Department to help. They kept working hard on this case, but the leads were slowing down. Months had passed, and things got even slower after the tragic murder of J.B. and Tracie. A memorial fund was established in J.B.'s honor at the Compass Bank in Dothan. This fund's objective was to sponsor a free performing arts camp for underprivileged children, and they would fund a piece of choreography to be set annually in honor of J.B. Parents and students at the dance school that J.B. performed at were responsible for this fund, and it was their desire to honor her memory by positively impacting the lives of the children and their community. The community came together in other ways that I thought were amazing. Central Phoenix High School was the rival to Northview High, where J.B. and Tracie went. However, after their murder at the very first pep rally, Central Phoenix High School decided to show their support and send a gift to Northview. The gift was a banner that displayed a heartfelt message. The banner read, "Rivals, yes, but friends nonetheless." It was really nice to see everyone come together. It's just sad that it had to be under these circumstances. Then, just a few months into the new year, in February of 2000, 2 teenage girls in Mississippi were found dead, shot in the back of the head, and left on the side of the road. Police began investigating a possible connection between these 2 cases. The victims in this new case were Amanda Welburn and Kelsey Bullock. However, after conducting a thorough investigation, it was determined that there was no connection between the 2 cases. 2 men were eventually arrested for the murder of Amanda and Kelsey. Their names were Paul Evans Jr. and Nathan Townsend. Both of the men were convicted and sentenced. There were other leads, other suspects, so to speak. One was from Battle Creek, Michigan. Police did not disclose the person's name, but they noted that he was at a party the night of the murders, right near where JB's car was found, and then he left town within days of the murder. To further investigate the possible connection, they interviewed the suspect and traveled all the way to Michigan on several occasions. This man was unable to account for 3 or 4 hours on the night of the murders, and he made statements that were suspicious to police. However, his DNA failed to match the DNA discovered at the crime scene. Eventually, the police had to move on and focus their attention elsewhere. At the 1-year mark, the case was going cold. Cheryl wanted to keep the girls in the news and in the public eye. She had an idea of placing the girls' photos on utility bills, as well as having their pictures on the envelopes until the murder investigation was solved. Cheryl also wanted the girls' pictures to be displayed in public places like sports complexes. Cheryl asked the city to please donate the Civic Center to host a charity ball in honor of the girls, with the proceeds going toward funding things like billboards. Meanwhile, Tracie's parents, Mike and Carol Roberts, made a memorial in the spot where JB and Tracie's bodies were found, 2 white crosses. They put them there at the anniversary of their murders, and by August of 2000, Mike had to put the crosses up for a 3rd time. The first 2 times, they were stolen. Who would even do that? However, the 3rd time, Mike installed the crosses using quick-dry cement, which made it harder for the thieves to steal. Mike Roberts told the media that he vowed to get justice for his stepdaughter Tracie, even if he had to take his last breath on Earth doing it. I saw a bumper sticker on the back of his truck that read, "Someone I loved was murdered." That same month, August 2000, America's Most Wanted filmed a special on this case. The host, John Walsh, traveled all the way to Dothan, Alabama to film a reenactment of the murders of JB and Tracie. The purpose of this episode was to generate new and relevant information about the case, and it focused heavily on that white pickup truck seen in the Big Little parking lot at the same time the girls were making that phone call. However, at the time, Cheryl was not aware that they were going to depict a reenactment of her daughter's murder. Cheryl told the media that watching that episode was going to be really scary for her. Police ended up with many tips after the segment aired, but nothing was relevant. In December of 2000, a tip was received at Crime Stoppers. It was said that a weapon used in the murder of JB and Tracie could be located in a creek in northern Dale County. The tip stated that the gun was submerged 6 to 8 feet underwater, so they sent divers down there to search by hand. They devoted several days to scouring this creek, but unfortunately, no weapons were found. I feel like there were so many potential leads that led them literally nowhere. So JB's mother, Cheryl, was invited to do a segment on the Maury Povich show. I don't know if you remember this, it was actually called I Need to Solve My Child's Murder. The episode aired in January of 2001. Cheryl sat with 4 other parents of murdered children, and they shared their stories and their hope of seeking justice for their loved ones. The decision to appear on this show was not easy for Cheryl. She had to fly to New York to film this episode, and she knew that it would require immense emotional strength and courage. However, she felt that it was one of her last opportunities to do something significant and find answers about who murdered her daughter. She knew that they had to keep attention on this case. There were other suspects that were in question, but each one of them was thoroughly investigated, and after years went by, the murders still remained unsolved. Tracie and JB's friends and family were still holding on to hope that they would get justice. Every year on the anniversary of their tragic deaths, their loved ones would gather at the site where the car was discovered, and they would honor them. Years later, 16 years later in 2015, the Thursday Review published 2 write-ups about JB and Tracie's case. They interviewed JB's sisters, Jo Beth, Jackie, and her mom Cheryl, and her cousin Lindsay. That is where I got a lot of the information about who JB was and how everything unfolded on that fateful day. The family was notified back in 1999. It had been 16 long years with no answers. The article included a picture of 20-year-old Jillian, 23-year-old Jo Beth, 26-year-old Jackie, and 27-year-old Jamie, posing with a portrait of their late sister, J.B. Beasley, who would have been 33 years old that year. They said they would never give up hope that her killer would be found. Jackie said that she thought of J.B. every time the clock hit 11:11 because J.B. used to stop and say, "Make a wish." When asked if Jackie thought J.B. knew her killer, she said that she thought it could be someone they knew or possibly an authority figure. She didn't think her sister would have pulled over for anyone else, especially at that time of night. When asked what they did to keep this case alive, Jackie said they created a Facebook group for JB and Tracie, and they had almost 4,000 members. They said they were selling vinyl stickers that said "Justice for JB and Tracie" on them, and they were using that money to help raise awareness for the case. They also planned things like a car wash and a 5K to raise money. They said they would never stop searching for answers. When Cheryl was interviewed, she told the reporter that after 16 years, she still lived in the same area. In 2006, she actually graduated from Troy University with a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice, and that the murder of JB had left her relationship with her other daughters very strained. She loved them so much, but it was really hard for her to remain close, especially since one of them looks strikingly similar to JB, and that was really tough for her. That is actually very sad that this murder has so many ripple effects. Well, I want to fast forward to the 20-year anniversary of JB and Tracie's unsolved murders. The Ozark Police Department was desperate to solve this case and willing to try anything, and that's when they decided to bring in a laboratory. Not just any laboratory, Parabon Nanolabs. They wanted to use genetic genealogy to solve this case. Remember, they still had that DNA. This lab uses advanced genetic sequencing techniques, and their expertise in this field has been instrumental in solving cold cases. They do this by identifying potential suspects through DNA databases and matching them to family trees. It lets the police identify a potential suspect by looking at DNA from family members who are willing to share that DNA in a genealogy database. This helps investigators create a bigger family tree than before. So, this lab narrowed down the results to only 5 people, and when Ozark Chief Mosley Walker saw the list, one name stood out: Coy Mcraine. He and the chief had actually gone to high school together in Dothan. He looked back through the files and found out that Coy, who had only been 23 at the time of the murders, was never questioned and never considered a suspect. He didn't have a criminal record, so his DNA wouldn't have been in CODIS, so they wouldn't have gotten a match anyway. But police checked into Coy's background and learned he was born in 1974 in Quincy, Florida, and then his family moved to Ozark, Alabama, when he was 3 or 4 years old. Coy grew up with his 3 older sisters. His dad was a carpenter and his mother worked at a nursing home. While he was a junior at Carroll High School, Coy started dating a woman named Zaffer. They had a child before Coy graduated in 1992. He and Zaffer remarried, and in that same year, they welcomed another child. Coy then joined the Air Force and supported his family while he was stationed out in Mississippi. Interestingly, police noted that Coy had registered a high-caliber 9mm pistol that he had received during his military service, and that was the same type of gun that was used to kill JB and Tracie. In 1994, Coy and Zaffer divorced, and Coy no longer wanted to be in the military, so he left, receiving a general discharge. He stayed in the Ocean Springs area and worked at a casino and then a fire department. It wasn't long before he started dating a woman named Cindy. They also welcomed a child together, and then he moved all the way to New York, but that relationship didn't last. So, Coy returned to Ozark and moved in with his mom. He worked odd jobs before going into the semi-truck industry. He went to school in 1997 and started dating a woman named Diana, with whom he had another child a year later. Coy finished school and became a long-haul trucker. He worked for 3 or 4 weeks and then came home for a few days. He moved into a home on Linby Drive in none other than the town of Ozark, and this home was about a half a mile away from both the Big Little Store and Herring Avenue, where JB's car was found. This meant that Coy lived within a short walk of where JB and Tracie were last seen and where their bodies were found. There were a lot of connections here, with the most important being his DNA, which was a match to the DNA found inside JB's body. About a year before the murders, in March of 1998, Coy began dating a woman named Jeanette, and she moved into Coy's house just a few months later. In June, Coy and Jeanette then bought some land next to Coy's mom's house, but before they could move into a trailer on that land, Coy had to clean it all out. He did this when he wasn't driving his semi-truck. Well, Coy wasn't faithful to Jeanette, and in September of 1998, a woman claimed that he was the father of her child. A judge ordered a DNA test on July 30th, 1999, just 1 day before the murders of JB and Tracie, but despite being ordered to take this test, Coy never showed up. Instead, he just decided to pay the child support without providing his DNA. I wonder why. Over the next few years, there were many petitions for child support accusing him of not even paying. In mid-August of 1999, Coy and Jeanette moved on to that land they had bought, and on June 25, 2001, they got married, they welcomed 2 children, and Coy kept working as a trucker. But I want you to fast forward to late 2018. Coy and Jeanette are married. They're now living in Dothan. Their daughter is a high school senior, their son is in college, and he's still a trucker. But now he also runs a religious nonprofit called Spirit and Truth Lifeline Ministries. He's a bishop and a preacher at a local church. He seems like he's on the straight and narrow. So could he have been involved with the murders? In order to find out, Chief Walker got in touch with 45-year-old Coy in January of 2019, and he asked him if he would help him out by giving him his DNA to build out a family tree for a case he was working on. Coy asked his wife what he should do, and she said, "You have nothing to hide. So, he decided to give a sample of his DNA. When his DNA was compared to the scene evidence from JB's body and clothing in late February, that match was made. The odds of the DNA coming from anyone else was extremely rare. I'm talking 1 in 122 million. That's 122 followed by 30 zeros. Yeah, this proved that Coley had sexual relations with JB, but it didn't prove that he murdered anyone. But when police looked for any connection between Coley, JB, and Tracie, there was none. There would be no reason for his DNA to be on JB's clothes or body. They weren't dating, and they didn't have any friends in common, so something wasn't adding up. Coley was under police watch until they could make an arrest, and on March 15th, Coley was finally arrested and taken to the station for questioning. The detective's first question was if he knew about JB and Tracie's murder. He acknowledged that he heard about it through town, but claimed he didn't know them. He had never met them before. That's when the detectives told him his DNA matched the DNA found in the murder. Coley took a deep breath, turned his face away from the detectives, and muttered, "This can't be happening." The detective suggested going back to the beginning and discussing his background, so that's what he did. When walking through what he had done throughout his life, detectives again said they had DNA and they knew he killed the girls. That's when Coley asked for an attorney. Detective Michael Bryan responded by saying, "Let me explain something to you. There's no lawyer that can change any facts of this case." Coley kept asking where his lawyer was, and Bryan kept saying they hadn't called a lawyer. Coley asked if he could call one himself, and the detective replied, "Coley, all I want from you is just to listen to me. Just listen to me for a second. Listen to me. What I want from you is the complete truth. You know what? Look." And that's when he grabbed a folder. He shuffled through printed photos and he said, "Let me show you again." Coley asked if he could get a lawyer, and Bryan said, "Absolutely." But he didn't end the interview. Instead, he put a photo of Coley's family on the table in front of him, and then he added a second photo of JB, and then of Tracie during their autopsies. Coley asked him, "So, we're not going to do the lawyer?" And Bryan responded, "We can do the lawyer if you want a lawyer. Absolutely, absolutely. I never denied that you could have a lawyer, so I don't want that to get misconstrued. All I want you to be aware of are the facts of this case. And the facts are that Coley Lewis McCrane's DNA matches the DNA found on the murdered body of J.B. Beasley." Ryan told Coley that he was going to tell the district attorney's office that Coley was a savage individual who kidnapped the girls, viciously attacked them, and forced one of them to have sex with him, and then intentionally executed both of them. Bryan removed the photos from the table, and Coley asked, "Are you putting that on me?" Bryan said, "Coley, you're the only one that can give the truth." Coley continued asking for an attorney, and in response, Bryan put more photos on the table in front of him. Coley said he didn't have to do that, and then the detectives left him alone for 10 minutes. Then the detectives told Coley that they weren't going to ask any more questions, but they wanted to inform him that he was going to be charged with 5 counts of capital murder and a sex crime in the first degree. Coley just replied, "Come on, man." But Bryan continued trying to get him to talk. At one point, Coley started to cry, and he said he never heard anyone ever. The interview finally ended, and Coley stayed in police custody. Coley's wife, Jeanette, was also questioned, and she was asked what she knew about the murders of JB and Tracie. She said that she'd heard about them, but she didn't have any knowledge of what happened. Detectives then told Jeanette that Coley's DNA was a match for the semen found on JB. Jeanette said all that proved was that Coley had sexual relations with JB. It didn't mean he was a murderer. Jeanette didn't think Coley was guilty, and she remained faithfully by his side. Surprisingly, many people who knew Coley thought he was innocent. Jeanette defended him during the news conferences. She said that she wanted to let people know that he didn't force himself on anyone, and he didn't murder anybody. She described Coley as a family man who pushed his children to succeed academically and even quizzed her on Bible history. Chief Walker himself, who knew Coley, said he was very surprised when Coley's name was a match for the DNA. Remember, they went to high school together. He said, "Every person I talked to said the same thing, but DNA doesn't lie." Of course, there were many people who were thankful that Coy had been arrested and that the case had seemingly been solved. Tracie's mom and stepfather, Carol and Mike, spoke to the media. Mike said, "We've been through pure hell for the last 20 years. I know we're going to have to go through a lot more because we're going to have to relive it again, and I'm ready to relive it. I'm going to put somebody behind bars, get him prosecuted, and get this over with. Maybe we can sleep at night." Then he added, "I'd like to see Coy get the death penalty." Carol said, "I sat down and read Exodus, where it says that if you take a person's life, you should have to give up your life. That's the law, and I honestly believe that should be what happens." They were both all for the death penalty because Coy had lived for 20 years in freedom, and he shouldn't live a day more on this earth. They thought that it needed to be done quickly. Now, JB's mom didn't speak to the media following the news of Coy's arrest, but I think it's safe to assume that she was also grateful that the case had been solved and an arrest had been made. But on the other hand, JB's biological father, Hilton, was skeptical. He didn't know if the police actually had the right guy. He told reporters that his legal advisor told him it would have been difficult for just one person to have committed such a heinous double murder. Hilton said, "This is not the work of a single person. We may be wrong, but my attitude is, I just have to wait and evaluate." After Coy was charged, the defense geared up for trial, and they considered two possible other suspects to present to the jury. Remember good old John Barentine? That's one. Also, a former Ozark police officer was a suspect. The defense wanted to suggest that John Barentine, who had passed away, might have been the killer, but the prosecution argued there was no evidence to support that claim. The judge sided with the prosecution and barred the defense from bringing up John. But like I said, they also explored the idea that a former police officer might be responsible. This officer came to the defense's attention through a blog post in 2015. It alleged that a woman named Marina Crum knew what happened to JB and Tracie. She claimed a former officer, in a drunken state, confessed he was involved in the murders. She said it was to conceal cassette tapes revealing local cops' involvement in the drug trade. There are so many weird twists in this case, but after the blog was published, this former police officer filed a defamation lawsuit. Marina's allegations gained a lot of public attention. I mean, of course, a police officer involved in the murder of two teenagers. Many people believed she was going to be a crucial witness for the defense, but during the evidentiary hearings, she admitted it was all a lie. So the defense would no longer be able to use her as a witness, and they lost all their alternative suspects. Now they had to come up with a totally different tactic, and I have to say what they came up with was pretty wild. Finally, just this year, on April 19, 2023, the trial for 49-year-old Coy Mcraine began. It was led by Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall. The prosecution told the jury all about JB and Tracie, how they were both extremely friendly, how they had their whole lives ahead of them, and so much more. The prosecution explained that on July 31, 1999, JB and Tracie got lost on their way to a party. They asked for directions at the Big Little store in Ozark, then used a payphone to call Tracie's mom. The prosecution theorized that after the call, Coy confronted the girls at gunpoint, ordered them into JB's car, and made her drive to a marshy area. There he commanded JB to undress and made her have sex with him. Then, when he was finished, he forced both girls into the trunk. Coy shot JB and Tracie at close range. He later drove the car to Herring Avenue and walked home to his house that was close by. The prosecution argued that even though neither one of the girls' autopsies revealed signs of vaginal injuries, that wasn't necessary to classify this as forced. Injuries weren't always present, and the forensic pathologists who conducted the autopsies said you could have consensual or non-consensual intercourse, and both can or cannot produce injuries. The Attorney General ordered Jeanette to testify at a trial. Now, she hadn't been married to Coy at the time of the murders, so she did not have any marital privileges. Jeanette talked about what happened on July 30th, 31st, and August 1st. She said Coy returned from a long-haul trucking job on the 30th. The next day, Jeanette went to work while Coy went to their land to clear it out. According to Jeanette, she arrived home from work around 8 p.m. and Coy came home shortly afterward at 8:20. He was sweaty from working outside, so he took a shower. 2 hours later, close to 10:30 p.m., she said Coy left to visit his mom's house. He hadn't seen his family in weeks, so he decided to pay them a visit. Jeanette said she remembered that Coy returned home right before 1 a.m. She knew this because they had a rule that after 11:30 p.m., the chain had to go on the door. So she locked the chain lock on the door at that point and went to the couch to watch TV. When Coy came home, Jeanette was still awake, and the chain was on the door, so she had to get up and open the door for Coy. She recalls the time. She said Coy's clothes were completely clean. There were no signs of blood or mud, and he told Jeanette that his car had been broken down at the Big Little store, forcing him to walk back home. He asked her to come with him and jump his car. So Jeanette actually left the house, drove with Coy to the store, and they were able to jump his car before returning home. They got back at 1:20 a.m. They slept for a few hours, and then later that morning, they got up and went to Walmart. They bought some supplies for his car and for the road because Coy had to leave that very next evening. They didn't talk for the next 3 or 4 days, which was typical because Coy didn't have a cell phone, just a pager. Jeanette testified that a few days after the murders occurred, her mom told her what happened. Jeanette thought about reaching out to the police since she and Coy had been to that same Big Little store on the same night. But, in the end, she didn't contact them because she'd only seen Coy's broken-down car at the store. No one else and no other vehicle were there. There was nothing suspicious in her mind. Jeanette said she never heard anything that would indicate that Coy met, had sex with, or killed JB and Tracie. But let's face it, Jeanette puts Coy's car in the exact same parking lot where the girls were on the same night, and his DNA was found on JB. Still, the defense argued the wrong person was arrested. They claimed that JB had consensual sex with Coy on the night she was killed. According to the defense, on July 31st, Coy, then a 23-year-old player, that's what they called him, encountered JB and Tracie at the Big Little store. He gave them directions, and then he hopped in JB's car and continued talking. Eventually, they decided to have consensual sex. When they were done, the girls dropped Coy off at his house. The defense said someone else then killed JB and Tracie. First of all, Tracie already got directions for Marilyn and Marielle. They were on a mission to get back to Tracie's, but even had plans to stop and meet Tracie's boyfriend, Wade. They even called him and said they were on their way. So why would they entertain this random guy? And Tracie just stands by while her friend has sex with him. Real fast then, coincidentally, they get killed by someone else? It just seems way too far-fetched. But the defense emphasized there was no evidence proving Coy was the killer. The only evidence tying Coy to the girls was seen, and that came from consensual sex, not force. The defense also told the jury that in 2019, during Coy's arrest, the police treated him horribly. They used tactics that he compared to Nazi Germany, and like I told you, it is true. The defense pointed out that Coy requested a lawyer 8 times, but wasn't provided one. He then spent 25 hours in that interrogation room sleeping on a mat on the ground. But that doesn't change his DNA being present. Chief Walker was called to testify, and he said they delayed booking Coy into jail to wait for a search warrant and to tie up loose ends. The chief argued that Coy was fine. He was moved into a conference room. He was given meals, and they talked about other things besides the murder, like high school basketball and football. During the trial, the defense only called a few witnesses, including a newspaper delivery person, a man who lived on Broad Street, the same street as the Big Little store, and Coy Mcraine himself. The newspaper delivery person, his name is Dan, said that he was delivering newspapers in Ozark around 2:15 in the morning on August 1st, and he noticed a Mazda with emergency lights on at James Street and Herring Avenue. Dan said he saw the car several times during his deliveries that morning. On a second sighting, a Mercury Grand Marquis was parked behind the Mazda, with 2 people and a juvenile inside. He said he thought it was an undercover police car due to the strobe lights. Dan mentioned seeing the Mazda again around 2:45, this time with an Ozark Police Department car nearby. Later, around 7 a.m., the Mazda had been moved to Herring Avenue. It wasn't until Dan saw the news article about JB and Tracie's murders that had a picture of the car that he realized the significance. He contacted the police and shared what he had seen. The defense also called a man named Jimmy, who lived on Broad Street in 1999, to testify. He said that around 11:20 p.m. on July 31st, he was cleaning his balcony when he noticed a white truck and a Mazda driving down the road, intersecting with Broad Street. The cars were moving at a moderate speed without being aggressive, and they entered the parking lot and turned off their lights. Jimmy then heard a noise, and after 15 minutes, both cars drove towards the Big Little store. Jimmy could see the silhouette of a man in the truck, but couldn't identify anyone that was in the Mazda. Initially, he didn't think much of it until he saw the picture of the Mazda in the newspaper. Finally, Coy Mcraine himself took the stand in his defense. It was obvious the man was nervous, and his testimony was shaky. He claimed he already knew JB. That's right, the two of them met in June of 1999 in the mall in Dothan, where he dropped off his girlfriend Jeanette at work. He said he stopped at Radio Shack, and JB happened to be nearby, so they talked, and JB introduced herself as Jennifer. Coy said that's how he knew her. He never knew her name was JB. That's a nice try, but everyone who truly knew JB strongly disagreed with the statement. Throughout her entire life, she made sure people knew that her name was JB. It didn't stand for Jennifer. We know it actually stands for James, which Coy would have never guessed. But Coy went on to tell the jury he gave this girl, Jennifer, as he's calling her, his mom's home phone number instead of his own. He didn't have a cell phone, and he didn't want JB to call his house while his girlfriend was around. Coy said JB called him at his mom's house on the same day they met, and then again in July. They had plans to meet up whenever they could. However, they didn't actually get to see each other until July 31st, the night she was murdered. It's so interesting that she happened to get lost right near his house that she'd never been to. But anyway, Coy said he returned home from the long-haul trucking job on July 30th and parked his truck at the truck stop on County Road 18. He explained that his semi was too big to park at home, so he had to park it at the truck stop. Then, he said on July 31st, he worked on the land that he and Jeanette owned next to his mom's place. Around 3 p.m., that's when JB happened to call him at his mom's, and they planned to meet at his old high school in Ozark at 10 p.m. Now remember, the girls were lost in Ozark. They had no idea where they were, and they were headed to a party in a totally different direction. So this made no sense, but Coy still tried to make it make sense. He said later that night he drove to the Big Little store, waiting for JB until 10 p.m. It was never explained why he claimed to have waited at the store instead of the high school. This man had his story all over the place, but again we know the girls pulled into the first place they saw that was open or they thought was open. But Coy said when JB didn't show up around 10 or 10:30, he returned to his mom's house since that was the only way that JB was going to be able to contact him. But she never called, so he just spent time with his family before leaving around 11:45 p.m. On the way home, his car started to act up, and then it broke down. But somehow, he coasted right into the Big Little parking lot. He expects us to believe that at the same time that the girls happened to get lost, he went to the same spot and broke down. Good thing his car made it. He said after breaking down, he looked over and noticed, "Oh my gosh, Jennifer, she's at the payphone." Coy then said he went up and talked to the girls, and JB mentioned she was running a little late to get home. Coy told her he knew a shortcut back to Dothan, and he asked if they could drop him off on their way, since his car was clearly out of commission. The girls agreed, and he sat in the back passenger seat of the Mazda. Now this is the part one think has some truth to it. He said at 11:45 p.m. both. And they left the Big Little, and during that drive, Coy chatted with JB while Tracie seemed lost in her own thoughts. About 8 minutes later, they were near the truck stop where Coy parked, so he suggested they stop and take a look at his truck. They pulled over, JB and Coley got out, and they got in the front seat of his semi-TR, while Tracie stayed in the Mazda. Coley said one thing led to another, and they ended up having sex in a bed that he had in the back of his semi. The defense asked if he had forced JB into the truck, and he said, absolutely not. After they had sex, they talked, and then JB mentioned she was in a hurry to meet someone. They got out of the truck and back into the Mazda, and then Coley asked to be dropped off on Broad Street to avoid being seen by Jeanette. He said the girls dropped him off about 12:30 in the morning, and he walked home. I'm not buying his version of events at all. Let me know what you think happened, but there's more. Before we finish, Coley explained that's when he asked Jeanette to help him jump his car at the Big Little store. They jumped the car, and they were back home at around 1 a.m. Coley said he stayed home for the rest of the night, and the next day they went to Walmart before he left for his long-haul truck trip. Coley testified he only learned about the murders weeks later when Jeanette told him. He expects us to believe he never tried to reach out to these girls again. He never called Jennifer, never saw her again, and never tried to reach out again. It was just this random one-night stand. 'Cause wouldn't you have heard she was murdered if you tried to get in touch with her after the fact? Coley said he gave his DNA because he had nothing to do with the murders, and he was shocked when he was arrested because he had no idea what it could be about. He never told the detectives that he knew the girls when they asked him because he was scared. Once they put him in handcuffs, he figured they already made up their minds. He wants us to believe he never saw pictures of these girls in all the newspapers in the small town. This was a big story that was featured on TV shows. He couldn't have at least recognized the woman, even if he didn't know her name. He wouldn't have just come forward and said, "Oh my goodness, I was with her that night. I can't believe she was murdered." Well, during the cross-examination by the prosecution, they poked holes in his story one after the other. One of the first things they wanted to know was how JB knew to call Coley's mom's house that night on the 31st. He explained, "Oh well, I told her I was only there on the weekends, so that's when she would call." Well, the prosecution brought out a notepad, and they had been jotting things down that he said happened on July 31st, and this is where they put all the inconsistencies on display for the jury. According to Coley, he had plans to meet with JB at 1 p.m. He described this as a date. They told him it was a remarkable coincidence, and he responded, "I guess so, and that's what I said." The prosecution explained that Marielle and Marilyn placed Tracie on the phone with her mom at 11:40. However, the women can't recall seeing anyone else there at the time, but he claims he pulled in around 11:35. When explaining how they got into sex, he said they were just talking, and then JB got onto the bed and Coley joined her, and they started touching each other. He said it all happened pretty quickly, and they were done by 12:15 a.m. The prosecution kept challenging Coley's account, saying that it just didn't add up. They carefully went through what Coley said and found problems in every part of his story. The timeline didn't match, the evidence didn't make sense, and the prosecution further raised questions about why Coley initially told them that he didn't even know JB and Tracie. They explained he was only saying he knew them now because he had to find a way to explain why his scene was found, so he made up a story about consensual sex, a story that made no sense. The prosecution argued that the dirt on the inside of JB's jeans didn't come from consensual sex in the back of a truck. They came from being attacked and forced to undress by someone she doesn't know and doesn't want to have sex with. In the end, they said it was clear that Coley shot these girls because he didn't want to be held accountable for what he had done to JB. Both girls would have been able to identify him. The prosecution told the jury about the totality of circumstances. They said that when you consider all of the evidence presented, the pieces of the puzzle make a whole picture. They reminded the jury that guilt can be determined by circumstantial evidence. They said in this case, you don't have to actually see the defendant shoot and kill JB and Tracie to know that he did it. When it came time for the defense to give their closing arguments, they again said that there was no evidence to tie Coley to the murders. No fingerprints in the car, no witness testimony, no motive. There was just too much reasonable doubt, and he needed to be acquitted. I want your thoughts. My thoughts are, at some point, and I can't tell you when, but between the time Marilyn and Marielle left the girls and saw them turning, they encountered Coy. He might have broken down, but he saw the girls, and I think he did ask them for a ride. Since he was around their same age, and he was probably being very charming and convincing, they agreed to drive him to his house, which we know is close by. However, he pulled out a gun and forced the girls to drive to a secluded area, and then, of course, forced JB to get undressed and took advantage of her, and then shot both of them after he stuffed them into the trunk of her car, and then drove the car back to Herring Avenue, which was close enough to his house to walk home. On April 26th, after deliberating for just a day, the jury found Coy guilty on all counts. Some of the people who were at the trial told the media that Coy's testimony probably did more to make the jurors believe he was guilty than anything else they heard in court. But his friends and family still refused to believe he was guilty. His supporters gathered outside the courthouse, and many of them peacefully protested, holding signs with the words, "Coy strong," with Bible verses on the back and front. Next, the jury would have to determine if Coy would be sentenced to life or death. They asked many family members to read victim impact statements to highlight the loss that he had created. JB's mother, Cheryl, said, "I thought I knew the meaning of devastation, trauma, and being broken. I have a hole inside of me. It's not something you get over. I exist without her." Tracie's mom shared that the toughest moments for her family were during the holidays. The absence of Tracie was just an empty chair. Being there was so hard for them. Carol expressed how Tracie was not just her daughter, but her best friend. Every Mother's Day, she visits the cemetery. She spoke about the challenges of trying to have normalcy in her life for her sons, shielding them from the pain, and giving them a childhood that they deserve. She described how difficult it is, even decades later. However, the defense argued there were mitigating factors that showed that Coy should only have life in prison. He didn't have a criminal history. He was present in his children's and grandchildren's lives, and he was of value to others. Even his daughter, Alicia, talked about her childhood and how she grew up in a loving home. She never saw her parents fight or her father ever be aggressive towards anyone. Coy's wife said he is very family-oriented, a great father and a good man. His children need him, and she needed him. In closing, the prosecution told the jury that Coy already had 20 years free after murdering JB and Tracie, and that the man they saw today was a different man from back then. That man wasn't a godly man. He was a rapist and a murderer. In the end, the jury chose to send Coy to prison for the rest of his life and not sentence him to death. The Alabama Attorney General released the statement. For 23 years, the families of JB Beasley and Tracie Hawlett have hoped and prayed for justice. While this outcome will not bring their loved ones back, my hope is that it will give them the much-delayed closure they deserve and will reinvigorate this entire community's faith in the justice system. The verdict handed down today sent a clear message. We have no tolerance in this state for those who callously take the lives of others, especially our youth. Coy's friends and family continued protesting about the verdict. On May 6th, they showed up to Justice Park to voice their concerns, claiming he was wrongly convicted. Coy was later formally sentenced to life without parole. He has appealed his conviction. The appeal is still pending. After the tragic deaths of JB and Tracie, a memorial was established close to where the Mazda was discovered. It's decorated with flowers, crosses, and angel statues, serving as a reminder that JB and Tracie will never be forgotten. Imagine just transferring to your dream college, right in the heart of a bustling city. There's always something happening. Grabbing coffee, studying in the library, hitting the gym, or going out with friends. For one young woman, it was the first week of classes. She joined her friends for Wild Wednesday to celebrate a 21st birthday, partying until the bars closed. But by the next morning, she had vanished. The only clue left behind was a desperate text pleading for help. This is her story. Today's case is about a bright, hilarious, and outspoken university student named Jenna Berlay, who was always unapologetically herself. Jenna was born on November 4, 1994 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the actual state capital. Her parents are Joseph Edward Berlay, who went by Ed, and Jacqueline Berlay, who went by Jackie. Jackie and Ed both went to college at Villanova University in Philadelphia. Jackie loved to joke that she was going to Villanova to meet and marry a rich man, but over the years as she matured, she became more concerned with getting a good education than meeting men. She eventually crossed paths with her future husband, Ed, who swept her off her feet. It turns out Ed wasn't rich, but he was exactly Jackie's type, and just as passionate about taking care of others. They were truly a perfect match. Jackie went into hospice care, and Ed did nursing and rehabilitation. They got married on October 26, 1991, and just a year later they had their first daughter, Janelle. 3 years later, they welcomed Jenna. Here are some pictures. She was a very cute and happy baby. Jenna was part of a large Catholic family. She had 13 aunts and uncles, 13 cousins, and 2 younger brothers named Jeb and Jacob. I couldn't help but notice that all the children have J names, like their mother. The Berlay family enjoyed taking trips to visit their extended family in California and Avalon, New Jersey, but their home base was at their house located at 346 Coddington Way in Harleysville, Pennsylvania, a suburb on the far outskirts of Philadelphia. It's on the far end of a circular road in a charming neighborhood with lots of pretty homes and spacious yards. It's a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath home, close to 3,500 square feet, perfect for a family like Jenna's. When they weren't traveling, the family loved hanging out at home with their dogs, Jay and Coda. Growing up, Jenna was a dog lover, an animal lover, and as girly as can be. She loved dressing up, wearing pink, and playing with dolls. Dramatic should have been Jenna's middle name because no matter what she was doing, she was the star of the show. You could tell she was going places because of her quick wit and extroverted personality. On the very first day of kindergarten, Jenna met another little girl named Tori Tornetta. Tori had a little accident and had to go to the nurse's office for a change of clothes, which gave Jenna an idea. Jenna decided she wasn't wearing an outfit she loved, so she too had an accident and followed Tori to the nurse's office so that she could get a better outfit from home. From then on, they were best friends. Jenna was known for her expressive fashion statements throughout middle and high school. At first, she tried to blend in, as most of us do. She wore Hollister, Abercrombie, and American Eagle, with the classic emo haircut, and secretly listened to Panic at the Disco when she got home, all while trying to maintain that preppy image. But at Soderden High, Jenna's fashion started to reflect her true personality. She wore sparkly rainbow outfits, glittery makeup, graphic tees, tie-dye, kitty ears, chokers, faux fur, heart-shaped sunglasses, crocheted crop tops, and dark lipstick. Jenna's style could be described as camp, over-the-top, exaggerated, and in your face. Her inspiration was hippie music festivals and emo nights, and she pushed her friends to their fashion limits as well. Jenna thought it would be cool to go into fashion as a career, but she was hyper-aware of environmental sustainability and the problems within the modeling industry, so the fashion path didn't make sense for her life goals. Jenna wanted to make a difference in the world and uplift voices that might not have the privilege to be heard. So she joined her high school's film production team, Red Alert, where she made short skits and documentaries. Her talent in filmmaking was obvious. She was creative and passionate. In 2011, Jenna joined Facebook, and I have to say, there are a number of selfies with the duck face and the peace sign. Her bio read, "Millennial Alien Baby," and her workplace said, "Your butt," so you can tell she definitely had a sense of humor. I also noticed she loved to change her hair color. It appeared to be naturally dark, but she rocked blonde and even pink hair. You can also tell from her interactions on her page that Jenna had a lot of great friends. She was quirky, funny, compassionate, and positive, and did everything in her power not to conform to society's standards. Social media was a place where she could speak her mind on every topic because nothing was off limits. She would share her thoughts on anything, from love to self-harm to being whoever you want to be in life, and not letting society dictate your path. In 2013, Jenna posted a picture with her little cousin and said, "I just want to steal her one day and go shopping." Kids actually really loved Jenna, not only because she wore really flashy and cute outfits, but also because of her childlike enthusiasm. She carried that same enthusiasm throughout her college visits and graduation. She even posted pictures in her white cap and gown with her friends, Aaron, Reagan, and their favorite teacher at graduation. She also joked about a post she shared about two women who were friends for 100 years, saying that was going to be her and her best friend Tori. Friends also started to comment about how meaningful the things Jenna shared were, especially when she began posting on her own blog. She often shared pictures or short excerpts from her journal, and one friend commented that she was already saying a lot of meaningful things that many people could relate to, noting that it doesn't have to be a novel. Sometimes short and sweet are best. In August of 2013, the summer after graduation, Jenna made the decision to relocate for college to sunny Florida, my home state. Jenna was accepted into the University of Tampa, where she participated in sorority recruitment and joined Kappa Alpha Theta. She took classes in film and media studies. She went there to escape. Jenna wasn't sure if college was even right for her, but she wanted to spread her wings and explore. She went home for Christmas that year, still feeling great about her decision to go to Tampa, as Harleyville was experiencing heavy snowstorms, referred to as Snowmageddon at the time. Sadly, the black ice was horrible. Jenna had a terrible accident, slipping and shattering her ankle. They had to insert screws and plates, and she had to go to physical therapy to learn how to walk again. This was what Jenna's summer looked like. After the surgery, Jenna had a small chance, around 0.1%, of getting an infection. Since it was highly unlikely, she decided to return to sunny Tampa and tough it out. The semester started, and against all odds, Jenna was among that small percentage to get an infection. At the ER, she was given an IV drip and a wheelchair. Ed and Jackie suggested Jenna come back home and take a semester off so they could help her out, and I understand how hard that must have been for a parent, not being there for their child. Jenna's accident completely changed her life. She leaned on her family and friends more than ever before. She started therapy, but it didn't ease the fact that at 19, she couldn't do the things other people her age were doing. She couldn't go out with friends, show off her outfits, or have fun. And that spring was when she really turned to blogging. The title of her website was Seeking a Great Perhaps, which I like because it's sort of about having lower expectations with the word perhaps. Maybe she would find whatever she was looking for, but sadly, that would become more of a reality than she could have probably imagined. She posted 42 blog posts in 2014, and in those posts she talked about body image, perfectionism, mental health, student debt, sex, and positivity. She was very vocal about women and how they should stand up for what they believe in. For example, she believed women should be allowed to breastfeed in public without stigma, and she wanted to destroy rape culture. It says, "Why does my dad tell me it's different for a girl every single effing time I go out?" Now, I can't say the R word again and again, so I'm going to substitute it with forced intercourse. If you're not sure what is meant by R-word culture, let me read you an excerpt from Jenna's blog on the topic from May 2014. It says, "Why does my dad tell me it's different for a girl every single effing time I go out? Because hello, the only reason it's different for a girl is because people keep saying it's different for a girl. You can't get too drunk because you're a girl, and then someone could force you into intercourse. That's the reason. Does no one realize what you're telling girls? You're telling girls they can't have fun the way guys do, because guys will take advantage of them. You know what would be better to do? Teach boys that it's not effing okay to sexually harm girls. You're teaching little girls that it's their fault if a guy forces them into any type of sexual situation because of what they're wearing or what they're doing." And then she says sarcastically, "If they were wearing a short skirt or were drunk, obviously it's their fault that it happened." People seriously put that into consideration like it's an okay way to think. Why in the effing world is it even a little bit okay for a girl to be harmed because of something she was doing wrong? End quote. This is clearly something Jenna was very passionate about. Jenna cared, and reading her work, I feel like she's speaking to every young girl out there, and speaking loudly. She was a very talented writer, and though I don't agree with every position she held, it's clear she thought deeply about the world and her place in it, and that's something I can get on board with. In April of 2015, Jenna posted on Facebook that SeaWorld should be disbanded because animals should not be enslaved for human entertainment. In June of 2015, when gay marriage was legalized in the United States, she posted this picture, you've probably seen it before, of Joe Biden and Barack Obama running in the White House holding rainbow flags. Jenna was outspoken about LGBTQ+ rights and equality. She loved people and wanted it to be known that whoever you were, she would accept you. She wasn't going to try to change anyone just because they might be different from her. At this time, she was also watching the show Orange is the New Black, and she posted on her blog that she wasn't into labels, which is a testament to Jenna's maturity and her free spirit. While recovering from her infection, Jenna actually opened up an Etsy shop for her tie-dye projects and expanded it into homemade necklaces. 20% of the sales she made went to her favorite charity, the Happy Hippie Foundation, a charity run by Miley Cyrus that aims to help LGBTQ+ kids who experience homelessness. Jenna had always been so grateful to her family for supporting and loving her no matter what, and she wanted to extend that same type of love and support to others. Jenna truly had a heart for those without a place to call home, so she made it one of her biggest missions to help the homeless. But Jenna could still accept help from others as well. For example, the day after Christmas in 2014, a whole year after the accident, Jenna went to her mother Jackie and said she needed help. What she meant was that her mental health had declined and she was in a depressive episode. Her mother heard her and helped her. She helped Jenna go to a mental health facility. She was so proud of her daughter for getting help and being so transparent to all of her friends and extended family members. Jenna had visitors while she stayed with the nurses, and she blogged about her battle with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and what doctors later suggested could be bipolar disorder. Jenna said that her thoughts had turned evil and dark, and that, "It happens to a lot of people, so I'm not afraid to admit it," end quote. And that's brave, since sadly there is still a stigma around mental health and not being seen as normal, when truly, we all have dark moments in life. In February of 2015, Jenna got a much-needed vacation. She flew to the West Coast with her dad Ed and her uncle Chip. On Facebook, with this picture, she called them her favorite drinking buddies and probably the best worst influences. You can tell how close she was with her father. They definitely had a special bond. After that trip, Jenna had the travel bug. She wanted to go everywhere and do everything. Her parents talked about her going back to college to take the next step in her documentary career. So Jenna decided this time she would stay close to home and enrolled in Montgomery County Community College, which was only about a 20-minute drive from her parents' house. Jenna ended up getting her associate's degree there, and from 2015 to 2016, Jenna hung out with all of her friends, Ally, Becca, Aaron, Tori, Danielle, Jesse, and so many others. She loved going to music festivals and went to the Philadelphia Folk Festival several years in a row, and one day she really wanted to attend Coachella. Jenna loved, in no particular order, Lana Del Rey, Bernie Sanders, Sylvia Plath, cheese, wine, Disney movies, dancing on tables, and using Snapchat filters. She constantly loved changing her look, as I mentioned, and dyed her hair pink, platinum blonde, and all shades of brunette. All the while, she advocated for what she believed in: anti-racism, feminism, affordable housing, and of course, combating homelessness. In December of 2015, Jenna posted this quote on Facebook. "It's winter apparently, so I'm going to assume it'll eventually get super cold, which no one enjoys. But all of us are fortunate enough to have everything we need, even if it's not everything we want. It makes my soul sad that there are people who have nothing. They are forced to live in the cold, and then we wonder why their hearts are so icy. Not all homeless people fall under the stereotype society has given them. It's important to realize we are all living in our own realities. We all have a story that has formed us into the person that we are and has directed us to the place we're at in life. So instead of pretending I cared like I always have, I'm going to finally prove I do, which we all should." What I want to do this winter is make backpacks called blessing bags for the local homeless people in Philly. I've seen people do this, and I think it's the least I can do. That being said, if any of you have any winter essentials to donate, food, toiletries, gift cards, etc., I'd be happy to take them off your hands. I plan to go to Goodwill and other thrift stores to get things as well, but I figured I'd use this site for something actually important. I'll attach a list I found online of what others have included, but any suggestions are welcome. This list doesn't include coats or blankets, which I also want to add. So if you're feeling generous, either comment or message me with anything and everything you can give. Let's start loving, helping, and supporting those less fortunate than us, instead of depreciating and disregarding them just because it's easier. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. Underneath, she did post an organized checklist, and Jenna's blessing bags were born. Jenna assembled the backpacks on her own and then drove an hour to downtown Philadelphia to hand them out to strangers. In 2016, Jenna posted a selfie featuring the pink, yellow, and blue pansexual flag with the words, "I do not have sex with pans," end quote. She'd recently found out that there was a label that encompassed her sexuality. When she cared about someone, she cared about them, regardless of how they labeled themselves. Jenna said that she'd grown. She thought labels weren't for her until she learned that there was a label for her. If you're not familiar, because I wasn't fully aware of what this meant, pansexuality is a sexual orientation that describes romantic, emotional, or sexual attraction to people of any gender identity. The prefix pan just means all, and I've actually heard this referred to as being sexually fluid, which ultimately means that you look for the qualities that attract you, and regardless of the gender of the person, you fall in love with them for who they are. And in January of 2017, Jenna posted that she was still growing, but for the first time ever, she finally felt like she was headed in the right direction. She'd gone to a women's march on National Women's Day, and Jenna said the march empowered her. Now she felt like she understood her femininity. It was what made her strong. Jenna said, "I know people feel alone and hurt and scared because I feel it too. Even with my white privilege constantly stapled to my face, I feel it, and I will always fight for what's right. I will fight for intersectional feminism because the whitewashing has to stop. I will always fight for equality for all, and my journey is just getting started." It's clear that Jenna is a very outspoken and strong woman. As I stated from the beginning, Jenna loved people and wanted to be as accepting as she could. She was the type of person who wouldn't let anyone talk badly about someone else. If she heard someone bullying someone, she would step in and tell them it was messed up, and then tell them to accept that person for who they are. We're all different. In the fall of 2017, Jenna finally had enough credits to transfer to a 4-year university. She did think about going back to Tampa, but it just wouldn't be the same. Besides, she had friends that were now going to college in Philly, so Jenna committed to Temple University. She was a junior at this point, majoring in film and media studies, and she did choose to live with her parents during this transition. She redecorated her room, she painted the walls teal, and she hung up new pictures and motivational quotes, so it kind of felt like she was in a dorm of her own. Jenna commuted the hour to attend classes in downtown Philadelphia. When Jenna wasn't in class or at home, she worked at a retail job and occasionally slept over at friends' apartments so she wouldn't have to drive all the way back to her parents' house. Now, Temple University had a very big social scene. It's right smack dab in the middle of downtown Philadelphia, surrounded by bars with lots to do. When you're in the Temple bubble, you feel safe, but stepping right outside the campus in Philadelphia is one of the highest crime rates in the United States. Crossing that threshold is like night and day. However, students felt safe hanging out around town, especially if there were locations that many students frequented. Unfortunately, during her first week of classes, Jenna had another accident. This time it was in her car, but she was lucky. The damage was minor. She called her dad, and Ed drove to Temple to help Jenna deal with getting the car towed and all that stuff. Now the car would have to be at the shop overnight. That was on Wednesday, August 30th, and the next day, on Thursday, Jenna did have a very early class, but now she didn't have a way to get to school the next morning, and she wanted to attend that class. So she told her dad, "You know what? Don't worry about taking me back home. I'm just going to crash on my friend Davis's couch." She had plans to meet her friend Davis Tren and his friends for a mutual friend's 21st birthday party that night. It was the infamous Wild Wednesday, which is a Temple University student tradition. It was Jenna's first Wednesday on campus. She wasn't going to miss it. Now, I wasn't sure whether this was a weekly tradition where students went out on Wednesday nights to kind of celebrate hump day in the middle of the week, or if it was just the first Wednesday when classes start for a particular semester. But when I looked into it, it appeared to be a weekly thing for students at Temple University. It includes bar hopping after classes up and down the streets surrounding the school, lots of drinking, and lots of partying, which is pretty normal for most college cultures. That Wednesday evening, Jenna's dad took her out for dinner, and they had such a good time. Before he left her home, he gave her a big hug and kiss and offered to drop her off at Davis's house. But Jenna said Davis was already out having fun, and she was just going to meet up with him down the street. They said their goodbyes, and she walked away. She turned the corner of the building, and Ed thought about how proud he was of his daughter as he watched her go. Jenna, Davis, and a few of their friends went bar hopping for a few hours. They kept running into another group of Jenna's friends, which included her friend Danielle. Jenna's night ended at a place called Pub Web. It's a sports bar on a road called Silmare Avenue, which is only about a block away from the campus. It looks like a typical bar, with a long skinny counter and a large selection of alcohol. In the back of the bar, there are some tables you can sit at where drunk people usually get brave enough to sing karaoke up on a small stage. And if you're hungry, they do offer burgers and wings to eat. It's a very small bar, and it gets really crowded with all the students piling in. Let me tell you what Jenna and her friends were doing that night. While her friend Davis, who she met up with, only had one drink that night, just before midnight he left. He told Jenna to text him when she was ready to come back to his place, where she was supposed to be staying that night. Jenna stayed out since Danielle's group had shown up, and they just partied and partied until past 1 a.m. Now, the bars closed at 2 o'clock, and this particular one started to clear out closer to closing time. One by one, Jenna's friends began to leave, and somehow there was a mix-up regarding who was taking Jenna to Davis's. But before she knew it, everyone she knew was gone. Jenna was sitting there at an empty bar, just finishing up her drink and texting Davis to figure out what she was supposed to do after 2 a.m. Davis woke up and he hadn't even meant to fall asleep, so he was scrambling for his phone. Jenna had called and texted him. In one of her messages, she asked if Davis was awake and if she could come over. In another, she asked for help, and that freaked him out. Why would Jenna need help? He texted back, but Jenna never replied. So Davis's anxiety kept him wide awake. He called Jenna back over and over again, but she didn't answer. Then he started calling their mutual friends, hoping that she had found someone else to spend the night with. Not everyone was awake at this time in the middle of the night, but there were a few friends who were awake, and they didn't know where Jenna had gone after they parted ways. By 8 a.m., when Davis still hadn't been able to get a hold of Jenna, he amassed a search group of Jenna's friends to scour Temple University's campus, hoping that she'd made it to class that morning. You don't want to think the worst, and most times you don't. But at first, Jenna's friends just expected her to get in touch with them sometime that day, and maybe share a crazy story of the night before. Jenna's friend Jesse got a call from one of Jenna's friends asking if he knew where Jenna was. Jesse didn't, so he got in touch with Danielle, and Danielle started looking around for Jenna. She was shocked that Jenna had pretty much been abandoned at the bar. Then it hit her. Where was she now? Was she still asleep? Had her phone died? Was she even okay, or was she in some kind of danger? The anxiety was beginning to build because, as much as everyone hoped Jenna would be fine, remember that outside of campus, the streets of Philadelphia are not exactly the safest place, especially for a woman to be all alone. Jesse called Jenna's mom, Jackie. She picked up at work, thinking Jenna's phone was probably dead, and maybe she was calling from Jesse's phone. When Jackie answered, Jesse said, "Jenna's with you, right?" And at that exact moment, Jackie knew that something was wrong. Jenna was one of those people who always texted and called when she changed locations. She didn't want anyone to worry about her. Jessie told Jackie that she and Ed needed to come to Temple immediately because Jenna was nowhere to be found. This is a parent's worst nightmare, and we already know that Jenna's father had warned her about something happening to women when they go out partying. Even though Jenna fought to break the stereotype that it was a woman's job to make sure that she didn't invite bad behavior from men, not hearing from Jenna would be a living nightmare. Jackie called Ed at work and said their daughter was missing. Ed went into dad mode. He picked up Jackie, and they sped down the freeway, not wanting his wife to drive because she was worried sick. At this point, Jenna's parents met with the Temple University Police Department. It was 9 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, August 31st, 2017, and recall it is the first week of school. The officers told Ed and Jackie there was no cause to be concerned, that this happened all the time. Students are free from their parents, they go out, they go on a bender, and they wake up at 2 p.m. the next day with a massive hangover and a wild story to tell. Well, Ed and Jackie insisted this was unlike Jenna, and we hear that a lot. It makes sense that we do, because if this was normal for someone, then no one would be worried. It's true that this was Jenna's first week at Temple, but she wasn't the age of most incoming students. She wasn't 18 or even a freshman at all, she was 22. She was responsible, and she had already done a lot of partying. This wasn't exactly new to her. The security department agreed to look up Jenna's student card in their system, which would show that Jenna never swiped into the university after the bar was closed at 2 a.m. If Jenna did stay at someone's place, they didn't live in a residence hall. Then again, couldn't they have opened the door for her? There were just so many questions about where she could be. An officer actually went to Jenna's midday class and waited outside. When the students and professor filed out of the room, the officer showed a picture of Jenna to each and every one, asking if they had seen her. The answer was no. She hadn't been at any of her classes. Jenna wasn't on campus, and when they called local hospitals, the few Jane Does did not fit Jenna's description. The Temple police helped Ed and Jackie fill out a missing persons report, getting as much information as possible about what Jenna looked like, what she'd been doing the night before, and when she vanished. Ed said that at dinner, Jenna was wearing an oversized light blue sweatshirt. Jenna's friend said Jenna had that sweatshirt tied around her waist during the night, and she was wearing a navy blue, ripped pair of jeans, brown boots, a white t-shirt with the words "Positive Vibes Only" on it, and her hair was up in pigtails. Now that would be a very distinctive characteristic. It's easier to spot than hair just being down, for example. Captain Edward Walmate was assigned to the case. He had been working at Temple University for a decade. He learned Jenna was last seen by friends at the bars, which were not technically Temple's jurisdiction, so the Philadelphia police and the Lower Salford PD out of Harleysville were roped into this case. Jenna's friend David showed investigators Jenna's texts before 2 a.m. asking for help. They also learned Jenna had messaged another friend before 2 a.m. via Instagram DM. She asked to stay the night, and then she asked for help, but that friend was asleep. Detective Terrence Sweeney of the Philadelphia Police Department knew that time was of the essence, and he requested Jenna's CSLI. Now this stands for Cell Site Location Information from her provider. Unfortunately, the last place Jenna went before her phone was turned off was PubWeb at 2 a.m. on August 31st. It seemed like her phone never left the bar. So what happened? Was she still there? Did she pass out somewhere outside of the bar? So, of course, officers raced to PubWeb as soon as it opened at 3 p.m. Mand asked the employees if they worked the night before. One of them had and recognized Jenna's picture, her hairstyle, the middle part with the two high pigtails. It made her stand out from the crowd. The manager let the police look at surveillance footage, and sure enough, they spotted Jenna. Later, they saw Jenna sitting at the bar until it closed. She's in a center seat, finishing a drink and texting her friends about needing a place to stay. As we know at this point, it's about 1:30 in the morning. The bar is empty. Jenna does make a frustrated gesture to her phone because we know that no one's answering, and that's got to be frustrating, especially when someone's been drinking. It's harder to make sense of things and make decisions then. In the footage, you see a man approaching her from the right around 1:38 a.m. He kind of leans over and whispers something to her, and then he sits right next to Jenna, even though the entire bar is empty. He could have sat anywhere. Then he seems to buy Jenna a drink. She does engage with him. It appears as though they're having a conversation, even though it's brief. But Jenna keeps looking at her phone, and we know why. She's trying to get in touch with friends so she can get to bed and to class in a few hours. Then the lights in the bar turn on. It's now 2 a.m., and it's time to leave. The man leads the way out, and Jenna follows behind him. They're walking outside side by side, with only a few feet between them, and they head northwest around the corner and across the street. Both of them are pretty intoxicated. Outwardly, you can tell this, but they are sober enough that they don't need support when they're walking. However, they're not exactly walking in straight lines, which makes sense. They just came from a bar and were drinking. But that's all the footage investigators have at this point. So they asked the bartender if Jenna seemed uncomfortable at all, and they said no. Jenna's body language seemed open. Plus, the bartender says he knows the man that she left with. He's a regular at Pub Web. His name is Joshua Hupperters, and one of the bartenders even had Joshua's phone number. That was perfect. Maybe he saw which way she was headed or happened to help her get to a friend's place. So Captain Walmate placed a call to Joshua's cell phone around 5:15 p.m., but he doesn't end up picking up at that time. So Wall tells Ed and Jackie that they've got a lead. Jenna was seen leaving a bar with a man, and law enforcement was in the process of figuring out where this guy lived so they could gather more information. Ed and Jackie began to wonder who this guy was, because, at this point, they didn't know if he was older, if he was a fellow student, and whether Jenna went anywhere else with him after the bar. They wondered if she would have gone somewhere willingly, or if he ended up taking advantage of her. It was a lot to take in. In the meantime, they went into nearby hospitals hoping to find Jenna, without any luck. Ed had a bad feeling. Of course he did, because we know how he feels about men and about women going out and drinking. They were rapidly approaching the 24-hour mark at this point, and it scared him. At 11:15 p.m. that night, Walm finally got a call back from Joshua. He apologized for not calling back sooner. He had gone out that night before and had been napping most of the day because he was sleeping off a hangover. Joshua said that he didn't know a Jenna Berlay, and I mean, we don't know if they even exchanged names. They weren't at the bar very long before they were seen walking out, but he did say he had gone out with his roommate that night, and by midnight, he had had a lot to drink. He was pretty much blackout drunk at the end of the night. Joshua said he purchased and drank about $200 worth of alcohol. He was definitely binging that night. That's a lot of alcohol. Walmate struggled to believe that Joshua could even drink this and remain standing, but he figured Joshua probably lost count, or he could be exaggerating, or he bought other people drinks, because we saw him buy one, possibly for Jenna. It's not that hard, as the price racks up when you're spending it on drinks. Walmate told Joshua he wanted to interview him the next morning since he had been caught on CCTV walking out of Pub Web with Jenna, and he might be the last person to have seen her before she disappeared. So Joshua gave his address. Walmate wrote it down, and he promised to see him in the morning. The next morning, on September 1st, Walmate heads to Joshua's apartment, and he realizes it was really close to Pub Web. It's only a few minutes south, but that was interesting because the CCTV footage showed that Joshua and Jenna were seen walking in a northwestern direction. So where were they headed? Walmate stood outside Joshua's apartment and called him, and once again, Joshua didn't answer. So Wall left him a voicemail saying, "Hey Joshua, this is Captain Walmate again from Temple Police. We spoke last night. Could you call me back as soon as you get this? We're basically down on your block and we would like to talk to you, so please call me back." Since Joshua wasn't calling right back, Walmate and Detective Nicholas Tula canvassed the apartment, hoping that someone knew where Joshua lived. They showed his neighbors a picture of him from his file, and no one recognized Joshua. Walmate was shocked. He did some digging because, remember, he was a local. He was a regular at Pub Web, so people ended up telling him that Joshua actually lived at 1708 North 16th Street, not 1608. So he was one digit off. He wondered, did Joshua lie about his address, or did Walmate hear him wrong and write it down incorrectly? Either way, 1708 was a 3-minute walk north, and only a minute walk away from PubWeb, actually less than a minute. All you had to do was turn the corner, cross the street, and you would be at Joshua's apartment. If you're looking at the screen, it's right around this corner. So, Walmate canvassed that building, which many students from Temple lived in. Neighbors told him that Joshua lived in apartment 1R. When you come in through the main door of the building, 1R is straight ahead on the first floor. It's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath apartment that has bedrooms on the main and basement levels. They knocked on the front door, but they got no response. Without a key to get in, officers didn't really want to do something drastic like break down the door if they didn't have to, since Joshua didn't live alone, and they didn't want to do anything without knowing more details. But they knew they needed to get in somehow, because they wanted to check for both Joshua and possibly Jenna, or if anyone had seen her. Outside the complex was a for rent sign with a phone number on it for the landlord, so they gave him a call. The landlord arrived and used the key to open the door. Now I know what many of you might be thinking. Don't they need a search warrant? Technically yes, but Walmate had already checked the common areas of the complex, hoping he could find Jenna or signs of her or a tenant from that unit somewhere on the premises. However, if they have probable belief that someone is in danger and could be inside a building, they can enter under what's known legally as exigent circumstances. Because what if Jenna was inside and possibly hurt or suffering from something like alcohol poisoning? There was enough probable cause that Jenna needed medical help and they could enter the home. When you walk in, there's a kitchen area, a living room, a small bathroom, and a door to the backyard area, as well as a rear bedroom. Then down on the basement level, there are 3 other bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Walmate made his way around. It wasn't exactly tidy. There were things all over, which is typical for college-age people. The table was covered in papers, a hat, a wine bottle, a sports drink bottle, and all kinds of miscellaneous items. There were also things all over the floor: shoes, a plastic bowl, and shoe boxes. So he looked in the main level bathroom, all 4 bedrooms, and closets to see if Jenna was there, but she wasn't. No one was home, but Walmate and Tula noticed 2 things: a pair of men's Jordan sandals with what appeared to be a bit of blood on the heel area, and a toilet paper roll with blood on it as well, or what looked like blood. They didn't have to search through anything to see these items. They were right out in the open, and very concerning. After the detectives left, they applied for a search warrant, and since Joshua still wasn't answering his cell phone, they were able to get his cell phone data without a warrant. Now, the warrant process for cell phone records usually takes a week minimum, sometimes a month, and they didn't have much time to lose. Not when Jenna's life could be in jeopardy. If they could track Joshua down as he moved between cell towers, they could pin him down and finally get him in for an interview, because that's all they wanted at this point. But I'm sure by this time word was out that a girl he'd been seen with was missing, and you'd think that most people would want to talk to police to rule themselves out. However, sometimes people are scared. Not everyone trusts law enforcement, and Joshua had reasons why he may not have cared for police. As they looked into him, they found out that Joshua Hupperters was a 29-year-old born February 27, 1988, making him 7 years older than Jenna. When Joshua was only 4 years old, his father Octavio was murdered on the outskirts of Philadelphia. A worker walked into a sewer brick contracting company on January 21, 1993, and he made a very horrifying discovery. Octavio's body was wrapped in a trash bag. The 5 feet 9 inches, 32-year-old had died from a single gunshot wound to the back of his head, execution style. His arms were tied behind his back, and he was shoved and contorted to fit inside a garbage bag. This case was never solved, and as you can imagine, Octavio's death was hard on Joshua and his family. Maybe this is why he was aloof about getting back to investigators. But in the meanwhile, Jenna's brothers Jeb and Jacob busied themselves by making missing persons flyers and hanging them all around campus. The flyer showed a picture of Jenna smiling next to a screenshot of her walking in public on Wednesday night. The flyer read, "Temple student Jenna Berlay, 22, has been reported missing by the Lower Southford Police Department. She was last seen in the area of Pubweb on August 31st, 17 at 2 a.m., wearing the clothing pictured above." Beneath this was a phone number for an anonymous tip line in the Temple Police Department. Jenna's friends and family passed these flyers out to students, and the university sent out a mass email. Jenna's sister Janelle also made a Facebook post asking anyone with information to please reach out to their father Ed, and it was reposted over 22,000 times. After years of Jenna showing up for her community, the community was showing up for Jenna. On Friday afternoon, September 1st, a young man named Jack Miley called that tip line. He said that he was roommates with Joshua and wanted to provide information about the evening of August 30th. He explained that he had gone bar hopping with him with the intention of getting plastered and picking up women. Jack said that Joshua was a former Temple University student who was currently taking some time off, but still living in the area and hanging out with other students. Jack said that he left the bars around 1. A man went back to their apartment where he slept until about 10 a.m. He woke up with a massive hangover, but when he did get up, he said he saw Joshua in the kitchen surrounded by cleaning products. That's when Jack noticed what looked like blood on the floor, scratches on Joshua's neck, and a cut on Joshua's hand. Jack said the cut was more like a stab wound. It looked like it went all the way to the bone. Now, of course, you see your roommate like this, and you ask him, "What the hell happened to you?" Joshua said that he blacked out that night and fell into a prickly bush. Then the two kind of just joked around about this as another casualty of a crazy night out on the town. Jack said that at that point, Joshua told him he was just going to finish cleaning up the blood from his wound, and then probably go to urgent care to get stitches because it would not stop bleeding. Now, I know this might sound insensitive, but Jack thought it was hilarious. He thought only Joshua would get so wasted that he falls into a bush and needs stitches. Jack ended up telling Joshua that he was going to run some errands, and then his sisters were coming over because they planned to take a trip to Long Island to visit family for Labor Day weekend. Joshua was like, "Okay, that's cool, but please don't let anyone use my bedroom," which is pretty normal when your roommates are going to have people over. This is also maybe why Joshua wasn't answering, because it was a holiday weekend. But all this sounded very alarming. Was Jenna with Joshua when he allegedly fell? Did they part ways? When did all of this occur? And why was he just getting stitches the next afternoon? So once Joshua left for urgent care and Jack went and did his errands, he said he came back with his sisters, but he didn't listen to Joshua. He gave them free rein of the entire apartment, including access to Joshua's room. So much for an obedient roommate. But nothing was seen that was out of the ordinary. Jack called Joshua as he left for New York, saying that he was now headed out of town. Now Joshua actually told him he too was out of town, visiting North Carolina. Now, Jack did think this was a little weird, because he had never heard Joshua mention that he had family or any business going to North Carolina. So, once he saw the reports that this woman, Jenna, was missing, he didn't know what to make of his roommate Joshua's story, and that is why he called in the tip line. I'm going to pause here to point out a few things. First of all, I'm assuming Jack called in because he thinks something could have happened to Jenna. Considering we've got blood, we've got Joshua's hand that needs stitches. But this story kind of implies, if he's saying that Jenna could have been hurt and that's why he's calling in, it implies that Jenna was over at their apartment in the early morning hours of August 31st when Jack was already in bed, and he doesn't hear anything. Is that odd? Secondly, Jack let his sisters into Joshua's room without permission, but there wasn't anything off about the room to cause them to be concerned. And third, Jack left right afterward, out of state. See, everyone's a suspect until they're not. So the investigator wondered if Jack could actually be involved, and maybe he was calling in this tip to get the police off his back. They wondered if he was making up a story about Joshua skipping town. Well, he skipped town for all the police knew. Maybe Jack had those injuries since all they were relying on was his call and his words. But maybe he was an upstanding citizen, and his tip was evidence they needed to do more digging. But this was all they had right now. So, Detective Walmate caught wind of Jack's tip and called Jack to ask him himself about what he had seen. After they finished talking, he asked Jack to call Joshua and ask him about Jenna and her disappearance. Well, Jack must have called because at 4:10 p.m. on September 1st, Joshua called Walmate back. At this point, the detective asked him if he was in North Carolina, and he said no, he wasn't. He didn't know what Jack was talking about. He said, "I'm in South Philadelphia," and that he just woke up for the day, which is why he missed the earlier calls. He told Walmate he wasn't that far away, and he promised to meet at Temple Security Department at 5 p.m. Spelums. That way they could sit down, talk, and he could provide them with any information he could. Walmate waited, but Joshua never showed up that night. But that didn't matter because his phone records had come in, meaning more departments were about to get involved in this case. I'm talking the FBI, the Honell Police Department, and Pennsylvania State Police at Dunmore Barracks. Now Dunmore is in Lackawanna County, in northeastern Pennsylvania, and Joshua's phone was pinging in Paw Paw Township in the Poconos Mountains, within 45 minutes of Dunmore. This means he could have lied about being in South Philadelphia, and all of this was making Joshua look pretty guilty. Not saying where you really are causes some red flags to go up, so the FBI provided the address where the police could find Joshua. Corporal Benjamin Clark headed to that property where Joshua's phone pinged. There was a wooden cabin on a lakefront property. It was really nice and part of a gated community on Shore Drive. Records showed it belonged to Joshua's grandmother, Ina Stallo, and it was the perfect isolated place to relax, hike, fish, and hang out on a family holiday weekend. Clark knocked on the door Friday evening, and nobody answered. He did consider going inside, but instead he decided to wait in his car. He didn't have to wait long because Joshua ended up pulling up with his grandmother in the driveway. He told Clark that he'd already talked to the police. He didn't know Jenna and had already let them know that he couldn't help them because he didn't have any more information. When Clark asked Joshua why he was out visiting his grandmother's house, Joshua said it's Labor Day weekend. He had a heavy fall semester at Temple, and this was his only weekend that he really had time to go visit. But we already know he's not a current student, so why is he being so evasive? It's not normal. But we know his father was murdered, so maybe he held a grudge against law enforcement. Clark started to size up Joshua's appearance and noticed those stitched-up cuts on Joshua's hand and that there were scratches on his neck. So of course, since Clark had him with him there, he asked Joshua what his injuries were all about. Joshua said, "Oh, these scratches? They're from earlier in the week. I hooked up with a woman named Vicky from New Jersey." He said the cuts on his hand were actually from a cereal bowl. So wait, what about the fall in the bushes? Now it's a cereal bowl? Interesting. Joshua explained that when he got back from the bars in the morning of August 31st, he made himself some cereal to eat, but he was blackout drunk and passed out. He shattered the bowl and cut himself on the pieces. Now this was an entirely different story than the one his roommate Jack said about the bushes. So either Joshua was lying, or Jack was lying, and maybe they were both involved in Jenna's disappearance. Clark requested that Joshua return with him to Dunmore, so Joshua went with his grandmother to the police station, where officers took photographs of him and his injuries and waited for the Philadelphia police to arrive. If you're watching, here's what Joshua looked like that night. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a gray sweatshirt. I was trying to make out what it said on it. It looked like it said second class, and then something about officer association. He's also wearing a pair of dirty-looking sneakers without laces in them, just the Velcro straps. You can kind of see the band-aids on his right hand in this photo. So they had him remove his outer clothing and strip down to only his underwear. I noticed at this point he had a chest tattoo, and it's a phrase I've seen many times. It reads, "Feel the fear and do it anyway." This is an inspirational quote I've seen many times about not giving up. He's got another smaller tattoo on his upper left chest area above his bicep and one across his right shoulder. His body really doesn't appear to have any significant injuries on it. However, when you get up close, you notice that there are some pretty nasty scratches on his lower left chin and neck area. They don't appear to be love marks. I mean, I understand a little passionate scratching, maybe down the back or something, but these look like defensive wounds, like someone was trying to hurt him and push him away, especially if the person was right-handed and clawing at him. But now let's look at his right hand. A bunch of cuts and gashes. I mean, one of them is, of course, deep enough for stitches, and they look bad. They could be from a fall or maybe that ceramic bowl, but they could also be from a knife. With the way that they look sliced and punctured, they look fresh. A detective took Joshua in for further questioning, and finally the search warrant for his apartment went through. Detective Sweeney looked throughout Joshua and Jack's place from top to bottom. At first glance, it was a messy college kid's home, but as you really examined it, there was blood in places where it shouldn't be, which was swabbed for DNA. First, there was blood on a light blue broken ceramic bowl. So was Joshua being honest? Maybe, but maybe not, because the blood wasn't on one sharp broken piece like it had cut him. Instead, it was splattered across the broken bowl, which was lying on the floor. It's almost as though someone had bled onto it, but who? Joshua? Or was it Joshua and Jenna? There was also blood on the right of the kitchen sink, as well as a knife close by. More blood droplets were on the lid of the trash bin, on a blade of that blunt kitchen knife, on a futon, on toilet paper, and on a toilet paper roll. Strips of gauze, a pair of sandals by the back door, and several pieces of clothing, all looked like they could belong to Jack or Joshua and had blood on them. But it was when they found a black hair tie that was the first indication that maybe a female had been there. We know that Jack's sisters were there, and it wouldn't be that unheard of if Jack or Joshua had brought girls home on a regular basis. They were still looking for signs that Jenna had been there. Next, investigators found paperwork from Joshua's urgent care visit and drugs. I don't just mean some painkillers to help with his hand. No, there was a lot of drugs. There were narcotics and painkillers like Xanax and marijuana. Could actually guess how much marijuana was in this apartment. It wasn't just an ounce. It wasn't 2 ounces. It wasn't just a gallon-sized bag, no. There were nearly 15 bags the size of pillowcases full of weed in this apartment, and it was worth thousands of dollars. What's more, they found $20,000 in cash. This wasn't your normal drug dealer. This was a guy or 2 guys who serviced pretty much the entire Temple University community. And okay, that is one kind of crime, but investigators are still searching for Jenna. That is when they looked inside the trash bin, and this case went back in that original direction because they found a light blue sweatshirt, a sports bra, and a white shirt that said "Positive Vibes Only," Jenna's clothing that she had been wearing last. Why would Jenna's clothing be in his trash? Well, investigators can think of many reasons, and none of them are good. They hadn't found a murder weapon per se, and they didn't know where Jenna was, but Joshua had withheld evidence. Therefore, he was arrested at 9 p.m. that Friday night. I know I already told you a little bit about 29-year-old Joshua. I told you about how his dad was murdered and how hard that was on him and his family. After high school, he went to Lacuna College where he sold drugs and faced the consequences, so that wasn't a new thing for him. In September of 2012, he was charged with public drunkenness and misconduct, and in October of 2012, he got a DUI for possession of drugs with the intent to deliver. After high school, he went to Lacuna College, where he sold drugs and faced the consequences, so that wasn't a new thing for him. In September of 2012, he was charged with public drunkenness and misconduct, and in October of 2012, he got a DUI for possession of drugs with the intent to deliver. Then he got a second DUI that same month, and in July 2013, he was charged with burglary while under the influence. Joshua had broken into someone's home and stolen electronics, credit cards, even laundry detergent, and a half a keg of beer. He was given 2 years of probation, and during probation, in July of 2014, he was under house arrest for yet another DUI. That fall, he transferred from Lacuna College to Temple University, where he was an on-again, off-again student studying advertising and risk management. I'm telling you this because Joshua was the most logical culprit for investigators. I mean, he had a history of lying, dealing drugs, reckless driving while intoxicated, and violence in connection with his addictions. When police were canvassing his apartment complex, neighbors gave Joshua a pretty bad review. 29-year-old Joshua and his 24-year-old roommate Jack had moved in that past month. Even though they had been friends for a couple of years, they were arrogant partiers. One woman, her name is Charmila, said that Joshua was a friend of a friend and they'd hung out together in large groups. Joshua acted narcissistic and arrogant in front of other men like he was competing with them. He even offered to sell her drugs and verbally harassed her and her sister. Definitely not good signs. Another woman named Natalie, who lived right across the street, said Joshua was friendly but gave her a bad feeling. He'd also offered to sell her painkillers and weed and was always inviting her to come hang out. She declined, and now that he was being investigated in connection with a missing woman, she really started thinking that that could have been her, and that was scary. She said about him offering her drugs that it was actually a really common thing. Almost every time I saw him, he was always outside smoking, and he would always ask me, and I would tell him I don't smoke, referring to weed. Natalie also said that since he knew she was a soccer player from Yardley, he would brag to her about how he also played soccer for Temple University and was on their varsity team. Recently, Joshua made up the story about how his dad was a professional soccer player. Well, Natalie knew that all of this was a lie. She didn't know that Joshua's dad had died or was murdered, but she did know that Joshua wasn't going to Temple, that he had taken time off that fall semester. But remember how Joshua told Detective Clark he had a really busy semester? Those were lies, and there's nothing stopping a liar from lying again. Natalie had also seen Joshua get into an altercation with a woman who burst into his gate. They were arguing, and then she punched him. Natalie said she had no idea who this woman was, but she had heard screams, so she ran outside that day to find out what was going on. Now, this was not in connection with Jenna's case, because it happened weeks before, but none of this looked good for Joshua, who was still in custody at the time. They still had to figure out what he'd been doing for the last 2 days. Where was Jenna, and is his roommate Jack involved at all? The next morning, on Saturday, September 2nd, Joshua's stepfather called the police with another tip. He said that Joshua came to visit on the evening of August 31st. Joshua's mom and stepdad lived in a house in Jenkintown, another suburb of Philadelphia, about 25 minutes away from where Joshua's apartment was. Joshua's stepdad said that Joshua stayed the night before he took a Lyft ride to his grandmother's house, so police filed search warrants to investigate the houses of Joshua's mom and his grandmother, 2 places they knew he had been. Next, Detective Edward Capel of the Philadelphia PD reached out to Lyft's security department. He was hoping that they had some kind of records of this ride. Now, Lyft told them that on September 1st, Joshua had requested a ride from Jenkintown to Holly, Pennsylvania, which is a borough near Palpak Township. This is where Joshua's grandmother's house was. Joshua's driver was a man named Avery Tucker. But what was strange is that the records showed that ride had been canceled. So the detective met with Avery Tucker, and Avery said that when he went to pick up Joshua, Joshua actually convinced him to cancel the Lyft ride confirmation and shut off the app. Then he offered Avery $200 in cash to drive him from Jenkintown to North Pennsylvania. Now, this was more than he would have made if he had used the app, since he wouldn't have to split the money with Lyft, so Avery agreed. Then he said he watched an older man helping Joshua load a large plastic bin into the hatchback of his car. That's super suspicious. This was a 100-mile drive, about 2.5 hours, and Joshua fell asleep along the way. Once they got to Joshua's grandmother's property, Joshua actually asked Avery to help him unload that plastic bin from the back of his car. Avery told investigators it was a large, opaque kind of navy blue plastic tote with gray or silver-colored handles, like you might see in a garage to store your Christmas decorations or Halloween costumes. Avery said he lifted his side of the plastic tote, and it was very heavy. He even made a joke to Joshua, saying, "What do you have in here, bricks?" And Joshua said it was school books. So Avery set the tote down in the driveway and he left. That's all he knew. When all of this information was being provided, Jenna had been gone for over 48 hours. Detectives were scared of what this meant. If Joshua was bringing a heavy plastic container to his grandmother's house, Was he trying to get rid of evidence? And did he succeed? When I say evidence, I think you know what it could be. On the morning of the 2nd, the police followed yet another clue, the urgent care paperwork. They met with a practitioner named Matthew Montagna, who treated Joshua for a hand injury on the 31st. However, Matthew wasn't able to reveal any new information. Everything they already knew from the paperwork was related to them. Then, after 9 a.m., the Pennsylvania State Police got a call. It was from a man named George Stabo. This was Joshua's step-grandpa. He was married to Joshua's maternal grandma A&Z, the one that Joshua had visited. Joshua said on the phone call that he finished breakfast that morning and planned to do some yard work for the rest of the day. There was a white equipment shed near the lake on their property, and George was checking it out to make sure there weren't any snakes inside. He confirmed there were no snakes, but there was something new in there, a large, blue storage bin. Not knowing what it was doing in the shed and what was inside, George decided to open it. He said he saw a blanket folded just beneath the lid, and underneath that he found the remains of a human body. It was a young, dark-haired woman wearing no clothes, and her skin was a yellow color. So obviously, investigators believe this had to be Jenna. It actually makes me nauseous to think about what a small space that is and how long it took to find her. Joshua had lied about there being books inside this tote. He lied about a lot of things. He was covering up a crime, and from the scratches on his body he had something to do with it. The search warrant for Joshua's family's home in Jenkintown didn't come back with anything new. However, inside his grandmother's cabin, there was a navy blue zippered bag, similar to a man's purse, containing basic clothes, underwear, socks, t-shirts, toiletries, and it didn't belong to George. It contained $3,000 in cash. Joshua had already left Philadelphia, so did he plan to leave the entire state of Pennsylvania and just disappear? They seemed to have caught him just in time. They may have never found Jenna had it not been for all these tips. As I've said before, if you see something, say something. It's so important. So at 10:49 p.m., Joshua tells Detective Joseph Marie of the Philadelphia Police about his whereabouts the last few days. Now at this point, he doesn't know that a body has been found. So here he is, saying that on August 31st he went to urgent care, he was stitched up, and he got that cut from a shattered cereal bowl. Then he said that evening, his cousin Eric Carlson came over and helped him move a few things, including a plastic tote full of old books and things to bring to his mom's garage in Jenkintown. Then, on the 1st, he paid a Lyft driver to take him to his grandma's house. Joshua didn't admit to anything sinister, but it didn't matter because they had all they needed. He was charged with murder, abusing a corpse, and tampering with evidence, but he planned to plead not guilty to all counts. He requested an attorney, which is his right, but allegedly he was told he couldn't have one. But I'm getting much too far ahead of myself. On Saturday morning, Ed and Jackie were at their home, and their house was packed with their extended family. For all they knew, Jenna was still out there, but they were losing hope. That's when Ed got a phone call from the Philadelphia Police Department, requesting that he and Jackie come down to the station. They didn't know whether this was going to be good news or bad news, but wanting to speak in person is a sign that it's probably not good. When they arrived, Jenna wasn't there, and Ed and Jackie's hopes were shattered. Officers confirmed that they believed they had located Jenna and she was no longer alive, though they still needed an official confirmation through an autopsy. The woman they found matched her description, and an arrest had been made. Ed, of course, wanted to know every detail. Jackie wanted everything to be over. They could not believe that this was the reality. When they got home, Jackie went straight to her room. After spending almost every day with her daughter for 22 years, she couldn't face anyone but her children and her husband until she could process all of her emotions. On that Saturday evening, Ed posted Jenna's picture on Facebook with the words, "Our beautiful angel Jenna is now in heaven. Now I know for sure that you can have a broken heart. R.I.P. honey." I feel so bad for her family. By then, all of Jenna's friends knew she was gone. Her best friend from kindergarten, Tori, screamed with grief. Aaron couldn't stop crying. Jesse said he didn't realize how much hope he had until it was all gone, and the empty feeling crushed him. Of course, Davis felt guilty, knowing that he had been out with her that evening. But it wasn't his fault. It was only her killer's fault for choosing to take Jenna's life. Jenna's autopsy was on Sunday, September 3rd in North Pennsylvania. She was examined by Wayne County Coroner Edward Howell, as well as a Philadelphia medical examiner. Her manner of death was homicide, and her cause of death was strangulation and blunt force trauma to her head. Now, this is not going to be easy to hear, so I would suggest skipping a little ahead if you don't want to hear the details of the way a person has been killed. Jenna had bruising and lacerations all over her torso. She had been hit 28 times with what they believed was probably a fist, causing bruising to her neck, face, and upper chest area. She had defensive wounds on her hands and arms from trying to hold off her attacker. Jenna was actually bitten on her right arm and stabbed in her left arm with a sharp object. That could have been that kitchen knife. She had been hit over the head with a hard object, causing a laceration on her head, as well as head trauma. Because of the cuts, it was determined that that broken cable at the crime scene was actually one of the weapons used. Also, Jenna had been strangled, and it looked like it had been done with a person's hands. It was so forceful that her larynx, the part of the throat containing the vocal cords, was broken. Since she had been found without her clothing, examiners did clippings of her fingernails, as well as oral, vaginal, and rectal swabs. As you probably know, DNA takes months to process, so they had to wait on those results, as well as her toxicology report, which could take 6 to 8 weeks. But the investigation wasn't over yet. Philadelphia police returned to Joshua and Jack's apartment one more time. They wanted to find out more. And one of the neighbors said, on August 31st, around 4 o'clock in the morning, she heard a woman screaming from apartment 1R. The woman sounded scared and in pain, and this surprised officers. From what they gathered, Jenna did go back to Joshua and Jack's apartment, but that was around 2 a.m. Before that, she had called her friends, asking for help to get home from the bar. So, did this mean that she was uncomfortable with Joshua before going home with him? Or was she just really trying to get home, and that's what she meant by she needed help? They figured she probably left with him because she felt like she had no other choice. In that case, why would 2 hours pass in silence before this neighbor heard a scream? Did the neighbor get the time wrong, or maybe things escalated? Now, it did appear there was another cereal bowl with some cereal left over in the sink. Could they have gone back to Joshua's, hung out normally, ate together, and then something changed? To find out more, investigators looked at surveillance footage they got from outside Joshua's apartment. Sure enough, they see Jenna and Joshua walking with about 2 feet between them, and then they enter Joshua's home at 2:32 a.m. Jenna never leaves. They never see her re-emerge from that front door or walk down the sidewalk anywhere in front of the building. I think we know why. Around 6 p.m., a person they had not identified at that point knocked at the door. At 7:09 p.m., he and Joshua struggled down the stairs, carrying exactly what you would expect, the blue plastic tote. Joshua already said that it was his cousin Eric Carlton who helped him move the tote to Jennintown, so was this that guy? Investigators tracked down Eric and talked to him. Eric said that he and Joshua had been friends ever since they were young. Eric's uncle married Joshua's mom, and they were only a year apart, so they got along really well. When their parents ended up getting divorced, they kept in touch, mostly because Eric actually bought weed from Joshua. Eric and Joshua talked that afternoon, and Eric came over to Joshua's so they could hang out and smoke. When he arrived at Joshua's place, he found him cleaning up blood. This was hours after Jack had encountered Joshua doing the exact same thing, so there must have been more blood than one investigator saw when they searched the place. Eric said he asked Joshua what happened, and Joshua said he was drunk and trying to open a beer, and it shattered and cut his hand. So this is now the third story that he's told about this cut. Eric told investigators that he and Joshua smoked in the apartment, and then Joshua asked Eric to drive him to his mom's place and help him move a tote of books into Eric's car. He remembers saying, "Dang, this is heavy," wondering what kind of books Joshua was reading. Then Eric did drive Joshua to Jennintown. If Eric wasn't knowingly involved in Jenna's murder, investigators assumed the same situation for Jack. CCTV footage showed that Jack entered Pubweb with Joshua on the night of August 30th and left at 1 a.m. on August 31st, exactly when he said he did. As for skipping town, the Long Island trip was a pre-planned vacation. Jack's family had made Labor Day plans long before the semester even started. If Jack's sisters had gone into Joshua's bedroom while Jenna was still in the apartment, it's probably because she was already inside that blue tote. The only question was, why hadn't Jack heard anything? The walls in this apartment building were thin. A neighbor heard screaming at 4 a.m., so what are the odds that Jack slept through a murder? It's not unheard of if you're passed out drunk and you live in a noisy neighborhood. But on September 7th, a week after Jenna's death, a vigil was held at Temple University in the Founders Garden. Even though Jenna hadn't been at Temple for a long time, hundreds of students showed up to support her friends and her family. In the middle of the garden, visitors were invited to write notes around a picture of Jenna smiling with one of the puppies from an animal shelter. The clothing store where Jenna worked ended up selling clothes in Jenna's honor, and her friend from Harleyville started a GoFundMe that raised over $5,000. Jenna's viewing was that evening, and her funeral and a Catholic Mass were held on September 8th, where the family asked that in lieu of flowers, all donations be made to a memorial fund. All that money raised was going to help Jenna's blessing bags for the homeless. Her mother and father felt like Jenna would want to keep that charity going. It was the perfect opportunity to share her story, spread love, and make a difference in people's lives. And that is what Jenna would have wanted. At Jenna's funeral, the pamphlets contain one of her signature quotes. It said, "I don't care about my outward appearance, because it's the least that matters. What really matters is your insides, your soul, your mind, your thoughts. Because your body is just a physical vessel of what's really important, and it's also extremely temporary. My soul will go on to live lives and lives, move from worlds to worlds, and have experience after experience. My body is just keeping me together in this reality, which is fine as long as you understand your greater purpose and that your true self can't be found outwardly, but must be searched for inwardly." I think that what she said is very profound, and I truly hope that Jenna is exactly where she wants to be. In the year and a half following her murder, the district attorney's office did everything in their power to find justice for Jenna's family without having to go to trial. They offered Joshua a 30 to 60-year sentence if he just chose to plead guilty to all counts, but he refused. He maintained his innocence. He said it wasn't him. Because of this, he faced life in prison since capital punishment rarely happens in the state of Pennsylvania, and the trial began in 2019. Jenna's friends showed up wearing cat ear headbands in her honor. Jackie stayed strong, and Ed vowed that no matter what pictures or videos were shown at trial, he would sit and watch it all, staring Joshua down the entire time. In opening statements, Assistant Prosecutor Jason Grinnell speculated that Jenna went back to Joshua's willingly and had sex with him. Now I'm going to get to the evidence and my thoughts in one moment, but it was speculated that when Joshua proposed that she had anal sex with him, Jenna resisted. She was no longer having fun and wanted to leave. We know that Jenna was a strong-willed woman. She stood up for herself and others, and if she didn't want something, she would let it be known. That is when it's believed that Joshua became forceful, and Jenna fought back, probably trying to run from the apartment, which resulted in a violent fight for her life on the kitchen floor. Joshua didn't just injure her, he used every means possible to take her life and her dignity. This also makes me believe that the sex was never consensual at all. These are just my 2 cents from reading everything I have. I think all she wanted was a place to go until her friends were able to come get her. But Joshua had other plans. Like his roommate said, their intention that night was to get wasted and pick up girls. There was definitely a struggle, no matter how it started. All the blood and the fingerprints on this crime scene, including the shoes, the kitchen knife, the trash can, and the plastic tote, belonged to Joshua, Jenna, or both. Joshua's DNA was beneath Jenna's fingernails. His DNA was found in all 3 places. The medical examiners had swabbed her vagina, mouth, and rectum. The evidence was overwhelming that they engaged in intercourse, but as I stated, I don't think Jenna was consensually having sex with this guy. If it wasn't forced, it was under the extreme influence of alcohol. First of all, we know she was drunk, and after the toxicology report came back, it was found that her blood alcohol level was 0.238. That's about 10 drinks, well past the legal limit. At this level of toxicity, many people struggle to even walk. Some people black out, and less experienced drinkers are at a risk for alcohol poisoning. Just because one person or both are drinking or drunk does not mean that they are both willing. Secondly, Jenna was asking for help from her friends before she even left with Joshua, meaning she didn't truly want to go home with him. Was she coerced? Did he act kind like he was helping her? What time did all this happen? We will never know, but it's no question that Joshua was there when Jenna was murdered. Joshua's defense attorney, however, David Nenner, gave a different perspective on this story. He said it wasn't Joshua at all. It was Jack Miley, Joshua's roommate of just 1 month and a student at Temple University. He was the one responsible for the murder, and Joshua covered everything up because he felt responsible. The defense said that Jack has a history of violence when intoxicated, and one time he got physical with a man at 7-Eleven after drinking, so he was arguing that this meant he was capable of violence against Jenna. But let's not forget about Joshua's record. In the defense's point of view and argument, they said that Joshua came on to Jenna. They got in a fight because Joshua wouldn't take no for an answer. So, there you go. Even the defense is admitting that she resisted from the start. Then the two argued. The defense said that Jenna, still drunk, took a knife and sliced Joshua's hand. They said then Jack woke up from all the commotion. He went into the kitchen and found who he thought was an intruder in his home, who had just stabbed his roommate. So he intercepted. He allegedly pushed her down the stairs and strangled her when she was at the bottom. This is quite a story. The defense attorney warned the jury that the prosecution might show them a text between Joshua and Jack, where Joshua admits that he murdered a woman while he was blacked out. Oh, that's interesting. So what's the excuse? Well, his defense attorney argued that Jack actually forced Joshua to send him that text after Jack killed Jenna, and Joshua was so scared of him that Jack threatened to harm him and his family if he didn't cover up all this crime and all the evidence. So for that reason, Joshua changed his plea. He was now pleading guilty, but only to tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. He wasn't pleading guilty to murder, he was pleading not guilty. After the first day of trial, Jenna's father told the group of reporters that he felt thrilled with the prosecution's efforts and asked them to support Jenna's blessing bags. The next day, Weiss was called to the stand, where Courtney Miley, who is Jack's sister, testified that Jack was a deep sleeper. She said if Jack was drinking or even smoking weed, there could have been 1,000 elephants stampeding in the room, and he would have slept through it. Now, I found that hard to believe until I actually heard Jack's testimony. I actually tried my hardest to put myself in the jury's position and hear all the evidence before I made my own opinion. But on the witness stand, Jack told the jury the full truth of August 30th when he went out to PubWeb with Joshua. He was very intoxicated. He said he consumed 1 milligram of Xanax, which you probably shouldn't mix with other substances, and a large amount of weed, 6 shots of liquor, and in his words, 12 to 15 beers. This is a dangerous mix, and Jack was not in his right mind. He said when he left the bar at 1 a.m., he went home and passed out, going to sleep on his bed. With that amount of depressant in your system, it is possible to sleep through almost anything, even a murder. Also, remember how Joshua told Jack that he was in North Carolina when Jack was on his way to Long Island. Well, the next day, Jack called in his tip to the police. The detective called Jack to ask him to call Joshua. Remember this whole story? Jack told the jury that he called Joshua 3 or 4 times before Joshua picked up. When he told him that the police were after him and asked about the cut on Joshua's hand, Joshua said again that he was in North Carolina, but now he said the cut on his hand was from a shattered cereal bowl. Jack didn't know why Joshua kept changing his story and also repeating that he was in North Carolina. It's not like any of this affected Jack, since he was already out of town himself. But if Joshua thought Jack might tell the investigators about the blood, it made sense that he would tell Jack to make sure he said he was in North Carolina. That way, he would relay North Carolina to the police, which would throw them off the trail and give Joshua enough time to dispose of evidence. Finally, when Jack was asked if he heard anything that night, screams, yells, a struggle, anything, Jack said no. A psychiatrist named Dr. Levy said that consuming marijuana, Xanax, and alcohol in one session could cause a blackout. In blackouts, people can become violent, they can become homicidal, they can want to self-inflict pain and forget their actions in the morning. It's very possible that Jack did hear or do something that night that he couldn't recall, but there was no proof that Jack was involved in a homicide or that he even had any intent to do so when Jenna walked into his apartment. We don't even know if he saw Jenna. None of his DNA was at the crime scene. Just because he had a wild side and took drugs did not mean he was responsible for what happened in his apartment. I'm sure the knowledge of the murder changed Jack forever. I'm not saying he's entirely innocent here, but in the long run, the evidence doesn't match up. It doesn't show that Jack was responsible for Jenna's murder. And neither was Jenna. In some cases like this, I sadly do see a lot of victim blaming in my comments. Maybe because a woman is social, she goes out in the town, maybe she has a boyfriend, but she still wants to go out and have fun. Or maybe she dresses a certain way, or parties. So let's not forget who the real monsters are in these cases: the killers. Their actions go above and beyond any apparent laws a victim could have had that would put them in harm's way. Jenna did go out that night. She drank, but she also tried to call her friends for help, and when no one responded, she probably felt she had no choice other than to go with a stranger who chose to hurt her. Could she have done other things? Sure. Could she have called a cab or a rideshare? Yes, but we have no idea what Joshua said to her. Maybe those were her intentions at some point. Joshua, on the other hand, had his own plans for Jenna. They were both intoxicated to the point of being blacked out. They had actually been overserved by bartenders that night, and Joshua had a long criminal record and a history of harassment that culminated in murder. It makes me sad that Jenna, who stood for women's rights, lost her life to a cruel man, the type that she had been warned about. It's evil irony, and it is such a shame. After 9 days of testimony, Joshua was found guilty and given life in prison for murder, on top of a consecutive 9 years for his other 3 charges. He, of course, tried to appeal his sentence because he said the police hadn't gotten the right search warrants or let him consult an attorney when he asked, but his sentence was affirmed. The judge said Jenna's murder was depraved and her killer deserves every excruciating moment as he spends the rest of his life in Forest County Correctional Facility. Jenna's mom, Jackie, said after the trial she misses her daughter. Jenna was unapologetically herself. She wanted justice and liberation for all. It's been over 5 years, and Jenna's bedroom still looks the way it did when she went to college. Sometimes Jackie sleeps in Jenna's bed, which makes her feel connected with her daughter's spirit. My heart hurts for that mama, who never got to see her daughter grow up and have a family of her own. Ed felt that justice was served, and he and Jackie went on to sue PubWeb for overserving Jenna and her friends, which contributed to the circumstances surrounding her murder. They also turned their attention to Jenna's blessing bags, which are still going strong. They host an annual fundraising event called Designer Per Bingo. If you are in the Philadelphia area, you should try to go. All year, outside organizations donate or collect supplies to make these blessing bags, and they distribute those backpacks far and wide, working with police to not only bless the people of Philadelphia, but also surrounding cities. You can tell they're Jenna's backpacks from their tags. It's a community effort to honor Jenna's legacy, and I'm so glad that I can contribute to keeping her name alive. I'm going to leave you with Jenna's own words. She once said, quote, "I want to change the world. I want to make a difference. I don't want to just go through the motions in life. I want to help people. I want to stand up for what is right and fight against what's wrong. This world has so much potential, and so little being done about it. You can think I'm crazy or ridiculous for thinking I can make an impact, but that's why I will. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. End quote.